Legitimate excuse for it. He's finally at the same time.
Eloise, could you kindly put the camera on the floor?
Yes, yes, with Rob, they will be together in Paris. Oh, that's the thing. So you're going to tell everyone. So
You come from Paris, right? Or somewhere.
I am leaving Costa Rica. I came here for that. Actually, that's fine. So then maybe yeah, you hold the snow. Everybody's supposed to be close for so long last night. Take the train.
The train is
Okay. We build the train when you have strength.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, crazy.
Because I'm coming by train on the third.
Welcome everyone. Hello everyone, thanks for coming this morning. I'll kindly ask you to remain a little bit quiet because the microphones are here on top of us and the people online can see the bus. So welcome. I hope you had a nice safe travel and rest. Have your hearts and minds ready to go. So I'll give the floor to our hosts here, Nikta, Andrea, and Patricia.
Okay, I can start. So welcome very much to ICTA and welcome to this workshop. So I think first I want to say a few words about where we are now and then also the workshop founder, that is the Maria de Maestro program of this institute. So we are at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology, that is a research institute of the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona. And this research institute has about 200 people that work here with about 30 seniors, so permanent staff. And we are very fortunate because we were awarded with a very prestigious award that is Maria de Maestro, Unit of Excellence. So this is an award from the Ministry of Education and Innovation in Spain. And this award gives us funding to perform workshops like this one and also many other activities. And just a few words about the strategic program of this award. We also need to submit a strategic program. And as probably you don't know, this institute is a bit unique in the sense that it really integrates social and natural sciences. So this is really our strength. And the program itself, the strategic program for is 4 years. So the duration of this strategic program is 4 years. It's dealing with major social challenges that cover the research group that are in the institute. So it's going from the ocean, and we are here today to cover actually major social challenges related to the ocean. It's dealing with land, with cities, with policy, and with consumption. So there are 5 main groups of social challenges we are working on. And another small details, but I think important details. So we are in a building here that is considered a sustainable building. That is, and we have a workshop dealing with sustainability. So this building was actually finalized in 2014 with the idea really of reducing both CO2 emission and water consumption. So the CO2 emission is reduced for about 60%. So we don't have air conditioning here in the summer. It's like all with natural ventilation. We have geothermal energy. And in terms of water consumption, it's estimated 80–90% of reduction when we capture rain. And then you see. So in the bathroom, usually you don't drink the water in the bathroom. There are fountains everywhere. Just in case, but you will see the symbol. There are fountains where you can, and there is a kitchen here also where you can. There are fountains for drinking water. Yeah, I'm really excited about this workshop. So let's wait to start.
Thank you, Patricia. My name is Andrea Colonese. I'm again also very excited about the workshop. I just would like to add some details about the information on the bathroom. Because if you use the bathroom, you are also making part of ongoing research that using human urine to fertilize plants that we have in the rooftop. So yeah, thank you for your contribution on that.
The plants that are outside, you know, when you go out and there are these very tall plants, these are also fertilized by yeah,
Right,
so
you see, you're
they're very useful today.
the cycle of the carbon, the nitrogen. That's what it's saying. So I just want to say that we have a very vibrant ocean community in ICTA that's composed by different scholars coming from different disciplines. So we have people working on historical ecology, marine historical ecology, archaeology, two people working on ocean circulation, past ocean climate conditions, ocean acidification, plastic pollution. So what we are trying to do in ICTA is looking at the issue of ocean from different perspectives, because the world is made from different people, different interests. And I think this is the perfect place to host this workshop. And I would like to thank people in ICTA in particular for helping us to organize this, Leopoldo for his energy and catalyzing, put together all of these wonderful people that we have in this room. And yeah, so please enjoy the workshop, enjoy ICTA, enjoy Barcelona if you can, or Catalonia. If you have time, I know it's gonna be quite intense. So just to say, we are gonna talk a little bit about this later, but we have a dinner tonight in Sant Cugat. So we need to coordinate a little bit how to get there. We have transport to get there, but we don't know if we can get there from here or we go back to the hotel. Other very useful information is we have an open Wi-Fi. So there's an open Wi-Fi here. It's called UAB, but Autonomous University of Barcelona. We also have Eldrun, have access to Eldrun. Very useful. We have washrooms on the corners of the building over there. And over there, we have a kitchen here where we have coffee machine. We have a drinkable water as well here on the corner. We are gonna have a lunch later. You have the program, so you have a lunch later. We have a coffee break this afternoon. If you need anything, just look for me, look for Alicia, and yes, I hope you can enjoy your stay here. Thank you very much.
André. So yes, I would really like to welcome you on board of the Reading Shades of Blue. I'm gonna say some welcoming words, and explain a little bit more about our objectives here this morning and this couple of days. So it will be a 2-day event where we will explore knowledge production in the interface of science, but also traditional science, local knowledge, to policymaking at various levels. And we will engage in plenary discussions, breakout sessions, so to develop strategies on how to advance this new emerging platform, which is called International or Intergovernmental Panel on Ocean Sustainability. So your participation here today, it's crucial to make this agenda move forward. And we really look forward to engage with you this couple of days. So this workshop aims to bridge knowledge. So that's bridge perspectives for people with more background on science, background on social science, natural science, people on background on actually living by the sea. Sandra, it's here from ICTA group. We will have also Nicolas joining us very soon. Also from the Ibero-American Network of Artisanal Fishers, and policymakers, EU representatives. We have people from Brazil joining online, people from New Zealand at the ministry, Andrei Polejak from Brazil, the Ministry of Science and Technology. So Samia from Bangladesh. This South and North dialogue, it's very important for us, and it's crucial to really build an IPOS that is inclusive and equitable. That's our highest expectations for today. So, of course, this starts for us here in ICTA when in Lisbon last year during the United Nations Ocean Conference in June, where some of us met for the first time. And also the fishers were well organized. They put forward a call for action to be more heard in blue economy dialogues and forums. So the bridging aspect of our networking started to consolidate. The International Science Council mobilized a plenary statement with support from the International Collective in support of fish worker, the Oceanographic Society, the Oceanography Society, and Nova University also looking at the past, the project tradition here in ICTA, and IPOS also joined. So we delivered this short statement asking for more open knowledge generation processes throughout the interface of science to policy. And IPOS will focus on the assessment of knowledge and the delivery of knowledge to policymakers and all aspects that we were going to go through around those days. So after Lisbon, we wanted to keep on moving and collaborating and improving this aspect of inclusion and equity in the development of IPOS. So this is where it all started. And thanks for the Maria de Maezzo funding program here for putting us together, and also for the self-funded participants. Thank you for your interest in IPOS and interest in our agenda for the next couple of days. I know you have been coming from very far, some of you, and facing a lot of struggle to get here, but it will pay out in the end. Thank you. So with this, I will invite Tanya and Francois. They are the minds behind and hearts behind IPOS. They will explain a little bit more of what is IPOS, and also Tanya will be presenting a assessment. So she's heavily, intensively in the last couple of months engaged with this assessment of 35 global environmental assessments by the International Panel on Climate Change, for instance, or the World Ocean Assessments, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So they produce this synthesis of knowledge that are directed for policymakers. So she went through 35 of those to extract what are the trends and the gaps in terms of how they look into ocean issues. So the morning session, she will present for the first time. Yeah, so it's a launch of the preliminary results from this assessment. And in the afternoon, we're gonna get more in-depth through breakouts on all the aspects of this knowledge production towards policy making and decision making ecosystem. So in the end of this day, we hope to have some highlights, what we're calling ID cards of IPOS. So you're really important. So feel free to speak out your candid thoughts and ideas. These will be fundamental setting stones for IPOS into the future. So tomorrow we're going to get more operational. So to design the agenda with more objectivity and see how, and we might keep on working together. In the end of the day, we will have this pathway outlined for us to continue collaborating. So in a nutshell, this is the program. We have it here on the wall. Also, if anyone needs a copy to look more in detail, but it's all based on ground information. So be very free to speak out. Only this morning session, I ask you to be patient because we're gonna see the first results coming out of the seascape assessment. That's all. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the participants online. And we might have some people also in YouTube. This morning session is being broadcasted to YouTube, so more people can also contribute. We eventually will take also questions from the YouTube chat, and the participants in Zoom also please feel free to jump in and pose your questions and ideas whenever you want. You can be heard on the room by everyone. Eloise has kindly volunteered to help us with hosting the Zoom participants, and Graham will be taking notes on the feedbacks and plenary discussions also, so we don't miss anything that's coming from you. Thanks. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Yes. Okay, so, well, very glad to be here with you. And I would like first to thank ICTA, because it will be the first official meeting about IPOS. I said IPOS, I do not know yet if we keep IPOS or IPOS. So thank you for ICTA for organizing this meeting. Thank you also for all the people coming from all the world to come in Barcelona. And also thank you for all the people who are in Zoom, in different sites, close or not to the ocean. So what is IPOS perhaps first? I think the idea of IPOS was born with Tania. From my point of view, I think that we had a working group at the CNRS in Paris, which was dedicated to the question of is ocean a global commons or not? And this question was asked relative to the BBNG negotiation that you know today, because it was a great success this year to have this signature about BBNG. And so we would like to push the fact that ocean was a global commons, and we were discussing about from the different point of view, was it interesting concept or not, and for what? And then I was looking at the literature, and I discovered that Tanya was publishing a paper about this question. And so we decided to discuss and to start to work together with this idea as what we will have to do if we want to have a vision of the ocean for tomorrow, which we will accept, how we will regulate the access to the ocean. So this is a framework of the IPOS. And then we try to organize also a group of scientists, the IPOS core group, including people from IPBS, from IPCC, from non-IP physicists or people from NGO, from young scientists or not, and so on. And we were working on this paper for a long time. It was the Christmas gift, the last year. And since this paper, which was published, we have now a strategy relative to the next UN Ocean Conference, which will be in 2025. It will be in France with Costa Rica. And we want to be able to propose something about the design, the structure, and the objective of such an IPOS. So if we look at the first slide, perhaps okay.
Yes.
Perhaps, do you want to take the floor with me? Yes. Okay.
Sorry about the slides. I'm not sure. We just it didn't seem to be put onto the computer that we needed. So we'll have them up shortly. But we have some very cool graphics to show you about the IPOS, which you can imagine just for a moment. That's what we actually have. But it's been a journey. We've been collaborating for about 2 years, as Francois has said, and when you're going against the stream of a traditional current, it's hard work because the ocean system is it's long been established. It's quite a fragmented system, as we're all aware. Mandates are distributed all over the place. And when you're trying to bring different streams of energies together and go against the flow a little bit, it takes a lot of energy and time and commitment. But we really believe that more open, inclusive kinds of knowledge is what's needed to address the ocean and to manage our way forward in this ocean that's under such pressure and experiencing such change. So it's been a really exciting process, actually, and a great honor to work with Françoise and to give you some insights on, I think we're getting there. But you can have the iPad slides in a minute, but I'll probably start.
Okay.
What? Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's okay if I turn off the lights. I think we see it better.
Yes, that's a good idea. Let's feel like we're
That's too dark.
No,
not
much.
It's shared. We just put it on share.
Yeah, it's on the light in here.
So that the participants online can also.
See.
Click here, yeah.
Sorry, guys. 2 minutes.
Okay, just to set two words about the future of this meeting and the importance this meeting will have. It will be the first official meeting dedicated to this concept. So it means something. It's well, the second one will be in Brussels, and it will be much more a European focused meeting dedicated to research institution and scientific tradition. And I think that the fact that we start with you is underlying the spirit of what we want to do. It means not only an academic knowledge, but also a knowledge, the whole type of knowledge, science, and also other type of knowledge. And it will also very important to include this type of approach in the next scientific approach we will have. So just to give the idea of what perhaps I will, you can start if you want again.
All right, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the IPOS or not, but I'll just give you a brief rundown of this. Was a graphic abstract of the paper that we published in Nature that François said was our Christmas present, because you know how it is with Nature papers, they take a long time. So essentially the aim, the objectives of the IPOS is to firstly identify what research is needed to address societal needs. Secondly, one of the other objectives is to coordinate scientific and other forms of knowledge so that we can understand the influence of human activities on the ocean and also the influence of ocean change on humans, because it's a dynamic relationship that we live in with the ocean. The other objective is to inform inclusive and multilateral governance. And I think this is where the heart of the IPOS really sits, is in bringing all ocean stakeholders and knowledge holders and ocean actors together so that they have a sense of agency in the way that the ocean is managed and moves forward and is managed in the future. The third one is to identify pressures and impacts and also scenarios. And we have one of the scenario experts in the world with us today, Laura Pereira from South Africa. She is the genius on this. We need to develop scenarios for the ocean. It's an area that's really lacking for ocean. So we all are very familiar with IPCC scenarios and the impacts of them, and they've been incredibly powerful to drive change in policy and to build a narrative so that people understand that climate change is an existential threat, that, you know, if we don't change, this is what it's going to look like. We don't have that in an effective way for the ocean yet. And it's so useful for policymakers and for decision makers and managers that need to make decisions on a day-to-day basis to know what the options are. What does business like as usual look like? what does it look like if we actually do things differently? We need much more of that for the ocean. So those are our key focus points, and we looked at in the paper.
Okay, and so what is missing? You see, there were three main structures which are involved in the ocean assessment. You have the IPCC, the climate change. You have the IPBES, about biodiversity, and you have the World Ocean Assessment, which is dedicated to the description of the ocean state. And IPOS will have to connect to all these bodies. What is missing is the policy knowledge on the interconnections between climate and biodiversity, ocean, humanity, and so on. But also to have consistent integration of ocean change science, and other type of knowledge I said before. And the question of inclusivity of alternate and transdisciplinary science in co-production of knowledge. And what can IPOS offer is to bridge the science policy divides through a tense of sustainability, pivoting on the SDG 14, and also to inform future decisions through a combination of transdisciplinary science and collective knowledge, and to provide policy input from best available knowledge and support effective governance. So, okay, I have finished.
Anyone hearing me okay, or shall I use the mic?
Maybe it's the online.
Yeah, I think online is like.
It's the online people.
Okay.
Gonna be back.
I'll put it onto it. Okay. So the objectives of today, Leopoldo has already a little bit explained the objectives, but the really exciting part, I think, and where I have been sleeping, eating, dreaming the last 3 months has been on this assessment that we've been conducting. So the EU Commission has been very supportive of the IPOS initiative, and there was a statement that came out after Lisbon as part of the governance objectives for the EU to support an international panel for ocean sustainability and to explore that. So the EU Commission DG Mare have actually commissioned us to do this assessment. And I think it's a really useful, and we didn't initially plan to do this, but it's actually been such a useful tool to do, because we keep thinking about what needs to be done, but we haven't really understood what we have. What are our building blocks? What have we done for the last 50 years or 100 years in ocean science, in other forms of knowledge? What are the gaps? We think we know what the gaps are, but it's been very interesting to go through these 35 assessments. This is our agenda for the day. So this is the beginning of the session. So what we're going to do, we're going to break this up into six categories, 6 elements. I'll show you now. Just to give you an overview, there were 35 assessments, as Leopold has mentioned, and 21 interviews. The interviews were the most fascinating part, actually. I met with 21 of the top scientists in the world, politicians, the heads of these big reports, experts on these panels, and very, very high-level people. And I can't say who said what, because it's an anonymous, so that we could have a frank conversation. And it was very interesting, because everyone just started really speaking about how they really were feeling in this ocean process. So on some of my slides, you'll notice that quotes at the bottom in inverted commas. Those are direct quotes verbatim from the interviews, but they don't say who said them, but it will give you a sense of what's happening inside the minds of the people that are actually doing this work. I think is very interesting. So these are the 6 categories, and why this is important for you to understand is because this afternoon, we're going to all break into groups, and we're each going to take one of these categories and work through them. So these boards that Leopold has put up for us are working boards, and we're essentially creating 6 kind of identity cards for IPOS together today. So there are different elements that we want to look at. And the one is knowledge. What type of knowledge is being produced, and what do we want? Well, how is this knowledge being produced, and how would we prefer it to be being produced? What kind of recommendations are coming out at the moment, or outlooks or options, or whatever you prefer to call them, and what should they look like? What is the interface with policymakers now, and how should it look? And how is success measured? Communication, which is key, and then how is success measured? And what is your view of success? What does success look like to you? So I'm going to take you through what the world looks like right now. This morning, it's going to be a big download of listening to me of all this information, so bear with me. But I think it's useful to know some of the pieces of the puzzle that we have. We'll have a break. We'll do the next 3, and then after lunch, we're going to make our own unbox together. We're going to think about what do we actually think is important, or knowledge, what do we want, how do we think it should work with policymakers, etc. Okay, so let's start looking through. So I want to also just say that this is a sort of 80% cooked process I'm going to present to you today. It's not 100% finished yet. It's been only 10 weeks and 35 assessments to look at. So you can imagine the amount of work. We have a spreadsheet that's 91 lines and 35 assessments wide. So it's a massive amount of data, and I have 22 hours of interviews, transcripts as well. So it's a lot to pull together, and it's not completely finished, but I'm going to give you some insights. So firstly, just a question on who is synthesizing ocean knowledge out there in the world. And we looked at 12 main institutions. The UN, most of the reports are from the UN, and some of these organizations are connected to the UN anyway, but mostly UN, WMO, IPCC, OECD, and then some of these other smaller, the numbers are smaller because they're less reports reviewed. So for example, with the United Nations, it was more than 6, WMO it was 5, IPCC it was 4.5, and so it goes down. These are the different organizations we looked at. Most of these institutions are not ocean focused, but they do look at some ocean content. But there is certainly a need to link all of this. It's just blatantly clear that we have bits and pieces of ocean all over the place, and there is no one place for it. So these are some of the quotes that you can see here. There's a lack of crossover between assessments, and too many reports, too many initiatives, too much fragmentation. Okay, and the kind of knowledge that's being produced, what are the types of institutions? And this is an interesting one for us, is whether we should be intergovernmental or independent. And we've had this debate around and around with a lot of different people. Most institutions that look at the ocean are intergovernmental. There are a few that are independent and a couple that are international. So the intergovernmental ones are the big ones up here. The advantages and disadvantages of being governmental or intergovernmental is intergovernmental gives you instant authority. It gives you cooked in funding. Your funding is relatively secured. It gives you a degree of legitimacy instantly, or credibility, not necessarily legitimacy, but credibility, and it gives you authority instantly. International is a bit more difficult because you need to build your legitimacy, you need to build your credibility, but it gives you flexibility and agility, which is really useful when we're facing tipping points in the ocean, because we don't have another 50 years. This has taken 50 years to get to this point of ocean knowledge. We probably have 5 years before we cross through some very dangerous tipping points. So this is why we're on the edge of intergovernmental and international, because we know there are advantages to intergovernmental, but we don't believe we have the time. So it's something to think about. Now, I think this quote was quite interesting. The policymaker said that there's a really strong need for a group, however we want to call ourselves, to support the ocean communities in IPCC and FBS, because it's been a struggle to get the ocean on the table and it's still fragile. very telling, these comments, because these are from the horse's mouth. Okay, the kinds of knowledge products that we reviewed, 28 were reports, so like the IPCC, FAS, etc. FAO. 2 were methodologies, UNEP's early warning system and the IOC's global manual on measuring SDG 14. 3 are data portals, UNEP Environmental Room, Ocean Health Index and Goose, and 2 were working groups, BISAM and the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative. So I think what's important to know is that there is lots of information out there. We have looked at all different kinds of information, not only assessments, but also other groups. It's pretty obvious that despite this comprehensive knowledge, the ocean continues to deteriorate. It hasn't made enough of a difference yet, everything we've been doing. And this is in our quote, actually, the state of the ocean is not improving. So it is our collective failure. It is nothing against anybody, but it is a failure. This was from one of the policymakers I spoke to. Okay, key takeaways. This is very interesting. How much ocean is actually looked at? How much do these reports actually even look at the ocean? This segment is ocean and terrestrial, in inverted commas, ocean and terrestrial, because very little of it actually looks at ocean, but this chunk looks at both. There's only 1/4 of all of these assessments look at the ocean alone. Of this 3/4 segment here, more than 3/4 is very limited or only a medium consideration of the ocean. And 1/3 looks at a little bit more at the ocean. So if you take those two collectively, it means the ocean is getting a very small slice of the pie in any of these agreements. And mostly they're spread out in bits and pieces in the reports. A couple of the reports have ocean chapters, which is useful. And the IPCC is doing this much better at the, and it's improved a lot in the last couple of years. But it has been a major problem. Sorry, this line has jumped up. So a big weakness is the lack of marine representation, and also interesting, the focus is always on climate, even when we're talking about the ocean. Okay, so this gives you an idea of the kind of content. Oh, one thing I haven't said that's very important. Sorry, this is really, really key. We only looked at the environmental pillar so far of sustainable development, because we still have to do social and environmental, but we had 10 weeks to do all of this work. So the next phase of the study will be social and environmental, social and economic factors. And we're going to talk about that in our workshops today. When we do our breakouts, please don't think that we are ignoring those issues. I know for a lot of people in this room, those are the issues, and we are completely aware of that, and we will come to that. As soon as this phase is over, our next phase will be social and economic. But this study specifically has been focused so far on environmental pillar, because we have to do it one piece at a time. So from an environmental point of view, the kind of data that's coming up is very interesting. And something I just want to point out is that global environmental assessments are really important for understanding the ocean state. They are this, the holy grail technically up there. They have a potential to really share information with the world. But the kind of data that's coming out is very dispersed. And you'll have, if you have a look here, these are the ocean state indicators that are presented. The size of the pie chart means that's how much of the 35 assessments looked at ecological, that's how many looked at ecosystem services, biological and biophysical. And then within these are all the different indicators that were looked at within these categories. Ecological is the biggest factor, which is not really a surprise because we're looking at the environmental pillar. But it just gives you an idea of how fragmented everything is. That there's a lot. I mean, how do policymakers use this? And then in anthropogenic impacts, a lot of it is climate change, one would think. And then these other pieces are noise, shipping, pipelines, invasive species, this category of other. What I find important from my background, I'm an ocean lawyer, ocean governance expert, and I work in a lab that has a complex systems approach. So we look at complex systems from that kind of lens, and very few of the reports actually take that kind of lens, which is interesting. I mean, the ocean is a complex system and it's a connected system to the rest of the biosphere. The ocean is the single biggest driver of weather. We talk about climate as if it's only climate, but climate is driven by the ocean. Should the conversation not be about the ocean? So I think this is really important. A couple of the reports do take a systems approach. I know that IPBES does for biodiversity, but it doesn't have a very strong section on ocean. I hope Laura's not going to shout at me. GEO6 does take a better look at a complex system, and the new AR6 synthesis report does take more of a systems approach as well. But this is what's needed across the board of all these reports. And even when we have these assessments looking at ocean, and even when we include ocean-only reports, still the data is heavily weighted to terrestrial components. Okay, what kind of knowledge is produced with regard to time perspective? So this is where Laura and Andrea are past ocean and future ocean experts in the room. So this shouldn't be me talking about this. But essentially, this is what I was saying at the beginning, is that we lack scenarios, and ocean scenarios are absolutely critical to understand what to do. In the reports that we looked at, most, if there are any projections, it's about the future, nothing much about the past. Most commonly, the timelines that do come up in scenarios are 2050 or 2100. Mostly they use IPCC scenarios. And they're mostly linked to biophysical data. Very little scenario development on ecological and social predictions. The historical perspective, I think, is really important. And I'm not only saying that because Andrea and Patricia are here, because that's their world, but the history gives us context. The history gives us a sense of where we've come from, and it gives us a place to compare to. So the history is critically important. And also, I had a couple of really interesting comments from the people in the interview. One of them said, we need a view 25 years ahead, because we don't want to go too far into the future, because that becomes an excuse not to take action in the short term. Because then it's like, oh, well, we've got time, by 2100, we'll have found a solution. So relatively short-term scenarios are what appear to be coming up. This is quite a telling quote as well. When it comes to scenarios, we are nowhere. We need help. We need to help people comprehend the difference between business as usual and alternative scenarios showing the benefits. I think this is really important. Okay, sustainability coverage, also very telling. We have the SDGs. SDG 14 is the least funded SDG. We all know that. Do you know what the number is? It's 0.1% of all development funding. 0.1% for SDG 14. It doesn't make sense to me. So this is a quote from Laura's paper. GEAs can catalyze transdisciplinary capacity needed to develop solutions across issues, sectors, and scales. These GEAs are really important. These big assessments are really important. They can cause shifts. So why are we not looking at SDG 14 properly and integrating it? Of 35 assessments we looked at, only 9 mentioned the SDG 14 in detail. Of 35 assessments, only 10 spoke about the interconnections between SDG 14 and other SDGs. Current ocean coverage does not provide a compass for stewarding the ocean. We don't have a way to steward the ocean yet. The reports, most of them minimal means that the word came up once. It means it literally came up once in the report. None, it didn't come up at all. And these are reports for the last 5 years. This is not pre-2020. These are the last 5 years. So there's only one quarter that looked at it in any detail, and about, I don't know, that segment that looked at it in proper detail. So very little consideration of SDG 14 in all these. And I like this quote because the question is, what is the mandate? Do we not need a mandate for sustainability? Because it doesn't seem to be the guiding principle at the moment in any of these reports. Okay, how is data produced? So most of the data production happens through synthesis work, where these assessments take data from other work or other models and create composite data. What is quite an interesting tool, I don't know if you're all aware of Ocean Health Index, but they provide a very high level composite percentage of ocean health and you can do your own for your own region. You input a whole lot of data and it gives you a percentage of the health of the ocean in your area. And it's being used quite effectively to guide policy, which I'll talk to you about a bit later. The Global Ocean State, the IOC Global State of the Ocean report has some interesting combinations of data, which I thought were quite interesting. And they also said that the improvements that are needed are open access. We need open access to all data. And we need extensive multinational collaboration. We can't do this individually as individual countries. Why does new data matter? Because we need to fill the gaps. And there are lots of gaps. And I was surprised by a segment that was so big on new data. I thought it would be less actually, but that's because synthesis of data. It's not actually not new core data that's being produced, a new way of putting data together. What are the knowledge gaps that remain? Well, most of the reports, almost all the reports mention that there are knowledge gaps. But the description of the knowledge gaps is very limited in most reports. A couple of them are very detailed. IPBS has quite a detailed list of knowledge gaps for the ocean, but most of them just say that there are knowledge gaps, but they're not listed clearly. The offshore deep ocean ecosystems are particularly poorly described and poorly monitored. And obviously the way that we manage the ocean is also very poorly understood. The focus on knowledge gaps, what kind of gaps are there? Biological, ecological, management, and spatial gaps. All of them were only looked at in a very limited way. 91% of marine taxa are not yet described. 96% of marine species are not yet assessed by the IUCN Red List. And most data relates to composition rather than interactions, which is not useful in a complex system. The frequency of publication, the point of this is that it's too slow. And we all know this. Most reports of the regular reports are published every six years or so, big ones. In 6 years' time, our ocean may not be viable anymore. So we don't have 6 years. I don't think we have 6 years. We need to be producing knowledge more rapidly, more synthesized knowledge more rapidly, potentially on an on-demand basis, in an open source kind of way. Also, the time from first concept to first report is too slow for us. The reports show that on average, concept to report, some have taken 12 years. So most have taken 6 years. We also don't have time for that. So we need to move faster, which is why we're all here today to design the way forward. There's an urgency for an assimilated approach. Are you still with me? Am I boring you? Are you fine? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Kind of
It's a similar practice.
type of inputs that are taken into account. So this is very telling for some of the people in the room, and I know a lot of you are very passionate about local and Indigenous knowledge, which, as you can see, is the least kind of input into these reports. So mostly published literature, experts, and grey literature, very limited Indigenous and local knowledge. This is effectively done in ICBES, and the IPCC Working Group 2 have also included some boxes and some links to Indigenous knowledge and really made an effort to actually start doing that. But most of the other reports don't include it at all. And GEO6 was the only report that I thought was quite interesting, uses crowdsourcing and citizen science. So those are options that we haven't looked at yet, really. Okay, how is this knowledge produced? So stakeholder engagement process. This is a slide that we need to finalize these numbers, but most of the reports don't set out their explicit stakeholder engagement. So there are only 42% of them really set out how to engage with stakeholders. Some it's not applicable because they're more data driven. And then for 55% of the reports, it's unclear. I thought this comment said it very well. Other stakeholders like small scale fishers have the impression that they are completely ignored and that their knowledge is not taken into account. Harmonization of data and data gaps. So obviously there are a lot of data gaps regionally in countries that don't have data. And where there are data gaps, how are those managed? What is the process of harmonization? And this leads back to legitimacy and credibility in the long term of the data that we produce. How do we fill those gaps? What do we do? So some of the processes that the other reports have gone through is averages, interpolation, models, proxies, estimations, and noticing some new research programs. I found this quite interesting that a lot of the data that we look at now has only been produced in the last 4 years, which shows you that we have a lot of capacity. There's a lot more that we can do. So also, the digital ocean twins and all of those other data models that are being evolved at the moment are only a small piece of the puzzle because they don't take account of social and economic issues. And you can't attach social economic indicator to the buoy that you put in the water or on a vessel. That's a different kind of knowledge that we need to bring in to complete the way in which we look at that. And something else that came up that was very interesting from one of the experts was data gaps are where we should be focusing. And what happens with confidence language in reports like the IPCC and IPBES to a degree is that there's this need for confidence language, the levels of confidence in the language, which gives the report a lot of credibility and a lot of legitimacy. But in that, you lose everything that hasn't been researched really well and that there aren't enough papers of. So you end up with gaps that could be really critical and really important. And they're not in the summary for policymakers. They don't make it there because they're least confidence. So that's something we really need to think about as well, and maybe do a gap analysis and actually even potentially a research group on gaps that go specifically to the gaps because they don't make it into the big reports. Okay, management options and scales. We're going to have a break after this section 3. Scales of management options. So the management options, the focus on management options in the report is quite high. A lot of them have management options or policy outlooks or recommendations or whatever you want to call them. I know policymakers don't like the word recommendations. They prefer options or outlooks. But most of them are too generic to be useful. There are things like improve sustainable fisheries, get rid of illegal and unregulated fishing, ecosystem management approach. But for an ocean manager facing his ocean that he's dealing with and his MPA, it's not helpful. So we need much more detail in the recommendations. We need costs of implementation. We need to understand the costs and the sequence of actions. This is a very clear gap in the assessments, in all of them. Policymakers need clear options with demonstrated outcomes. They need options and scenarios and can show them what the options look like. They're too high level and too global to be actionable. And this is such a level of frustration for policymakers. It came through so strongly. What are the stakeholders? Who do we target with these recommendations? All the reports, almost all the reports have summaries for policymakers. Very few have policies for the private sector, which I think is also a big gap. IRP and GO6 have summaries for business, but if you think about where the money sits, it's in the private sector, and the private sector can move. They can make decisions really quickly. The private sector could be a really good ally in ocean sustainability. If they were engaged properly, if there was a strong interface between science and the private sector, there's a lot of potential to shift things in much more quickly, I think, in ocean space. Only 2 reports had summaries for business. No reports for civil society, no summaries for civil society, no summaries for community. So plain language and infographics and things like that, but not directed at specific user groups. Something that we could do and should do. Okay, insights from the seascape assessment on what do these management options look like. What I found interesting was that mitigation and adaptation options are mixed up. They're not clearly separated in a lot of the reports. They're not, it's not like these are a series of mitigation options, these are a series of adaptation options, and this is how you break them down. They're kind of a bit mixed. The working group, the AR6 working group 3, they very specifically and clearly look only at mitigation. So they were talking about things like blue carbon management, CDR and geoengineering, which is another whole conversation, alternative energy sources and shipping, and then adaptation measures that come up are the things we all know: nature-based solutions, early warning systems, adaptive governance, stakeholder inclusivity, and equity and justice. What the AR6 summary synthesis report says is this is where it's at. We need climate resilient development, which is a combination of mitigation and adaptation. This is what the new report has come out with. So we need something in the middle to create climate resilience. Let me see if there's any questions on the first section, and then we'll have a break. Questions on the prizes, questions, any other?
Thank you. Feel free to jump in, and while you do so, please say your name and where you're from, your affiliation. Right now, we're gonna just start scratching the surface of the all dimensions of the knowledge production, what types of knowledge, how this knowledge is being produced, and what the sorts of recommendations are also. Feel free to jump in. And Graham will be taking notes for us.
Yes, Ronald.
I would like to start out just because people are still very shy of the conversation. My name is Kelapati Ramakrishna, and as some of you know, I go by the shorter version of it, Rama, so please call me that. I'm with the Woodsole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts. I'm the director of the Marine Policy Center. And I want to begin by first thanking our hosts for bringing us all together. And most importantly, thanking Francoise and Tanya for the yeoman work that they had done in thinking about this for a long period of time. In fact, I met both of them at the One Ocean Summit in Brest last February, and that's when I was introduced to this topic. And having been a part of IPCC, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and the Interlinkages Assessment, I have several scars of being part of these assessments. And so I was initially very skeptical that one more assessment of a kind is what we need. But over a period of time, I was persuaded that we need to really give it a very serious thought. And so what we're doing now, I think, is exactly that. And what Francoise and Tanya had presented now gives us a lot of material to work with. But we need to dig into it. And that requires us to either divide us up into smaller groups and then take each topic and then see what is missing and what is needed. Because unlike many of you, I have a slightly different background. Maybe Tanya is a lawyer, so I shouldn't say I have a unique background, but I'm an international lawyer. And but I worked all through my life with scientists. And so if I were to say what it is that I do, maybe not so well, is connecting science to public policy. And I worked in the United Nations for many years in the Green Climate Fund and various other places, and believe that what we are experiencing with the realization of the role that ocean plays in climate stabilization to begin with, and more broadly about the role that ocean plays in our ability to meet the sustainable development goals is huge. And the time is now. Though last year was called the year of the ocean, this year we have already began with a series of very high-powered meetings. And right now, we have the UN Water Week taking place in New York. And next week, there is another important meeting in New York. And so I want us to succeed in this effort. And to be able to do that, we need to not only think about what we, as a group of experts that have been thinking about for a long period of time, think ought to be done, but also reflect on what it is that the world community wants to do. And unless we make that connection, the question is, well, this is a self-appointed group of people, and then they say something ought to be done, fine, let them do it. But then, if we're going to put the effort needed, we want us to be taken seriously with our conclusions. Whatever action items that we have, the world community should pay attention, and which requires us to be responsive to, for example, what the IPCC had gone through in the adoption of the synthesis report. They were to finish it on Friday afternoon and Sunday night. Hungry, sleep deprived, very cranky, but then they had come up with it. But the fact of the matter is, that was immediately taken notice of by everybody around the world. And so we want whatever that we produce at the end of the day to be taken seriously and acted upon. And so these are just broad comments, not anything going specific into that, but I do have specific observations and approaches that we might want to talk about as we move forward. Thank you.
We have also some questions from the Zoom, but we can take another one from the floor. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I'm Richard Norris. I'm from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, from the Center for Marine Biodiversity and Conservation. And I'm actually a former Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution researcher.
Everybody in the world.
Of course, I'm a scientist, so I'm thinking about like the historical record and things like this. But I have two sort of thoughts that maybe are much more relevant to this discussion. One is that I think that we need to have, of course, a way not only of telling people what is likely to change in the future, so that's kind of a scientific problem. But the other is like, what is the value of making those sorts of changes? When you think about like medical interventions, of course, it's a question of cost benefit ratios, and the same thing will be true, for dealing with sustainability problems. I think sustainability virtually is, an economic decision for the most part. And so I think that the being able to value ecosystem services is terrifically powerful, particularly for local policymakers, for people who are running cities, for example, or communities like that. And that brings me to my second point, which is that when Kyoto was negotiated, that was very broad scale kind of thinking, and of course it became very difficult to get all the governments on board with that. In part because it was this very global kind of nebulous sort of like what exactly are the actions that we take here. And so then when Paris came along, there's the thought, well, we'll try to get individual governments to say what they will commit to and make it a little bit more local. And it seems to me that we need to go even farther in that direction, to think about how communities, those of us kind of really on the very granular level, how we can improve the conditions where we are. And I just have one example of this. So years ago, one of our researchers, Octavio Alberto, who works in Mexico, he found that he could evaluate the economic value of mangrove forests that were viewed as having no value by the Mexican government and no relationship to fisheries, for example. Of course, there are nursery grounds for fisheries. And so his estimate of like $37,000 per hectare or something like that was transformative because it made the Mexican government say, hey, look at this, you know, what we think is no value actually has value, and it's connected to this important industry, namely fisheries. So I think we ought to do more of that kind of stuff. But I love this discussion. This is great.
Thank you, Rich.
Yes.
Thank you. As my name is Luna, I'm a PhD student here working on the socioeconomic impact of climate change on small-scale fisheries. With a study site in Kenya and how community-based marine protected area can serve as an adaptation tool. And I was just curious about how you selected people like the stakeholders you interviewed, and were they supportive in this idea of developing the IPOS?
Okay, thank you for that. So we haven't yet interviewed stakeholders at the local scale. This is the first meeting with representatives of local stakeholders. This assessment has been, interviews have only been with policymakers and experts, because we're looking specifically at the interface between science and policy at the moment, because this is probably being commissioned to do with this assessment that I've been discussing. But certainly this phase today that we will do this afternoon will be around exactly that question. How do we engage communities to get them on board? What are the processes that we need to do that? And Leopoldo will lead us through tomorrow a network, and Mariam also knows this very well, so she will help with that. Networking to processes to actually show a way to do it. So very much on the agenda. Absolutely. Coming.
Thank you. So thanks a lot. Let's take a question from our colleagues on Zoom. Maria Lamen. Let me see if I can put her.
Okay, I have good morning to everybody. I believe you can hear me now. I just lost the connection. So good morning from Brussels. My name is Maria Laminen, and I work as an international relations officer, an expert in DG Mare, which is the Directorate General of the European Commission for Maritime Affairs and Fisheries. And I'm very glad to join you for this discussion. I have been working kind of behind the scenes a little bit on this, and we're very interested in the Commission on this issue. And as it was mentioned by Tanya in the beginning, the Commission actually has been calling for a proper assessment to look into this issue, and we have something, it's a strategy on international ocean governance, and within that agenda, that strategy, we're calling for, or actually asking or encouraging creating a transdisciplinary intergovernmental science policy interface for ocean sustainability and IPOS, and building on applicable global expertise and existing scientific bodies. And that is the Commission view, but we have also the Parliament calling for similar things, as well as the Council. So basically the EU institutions together are behind an initiative to look properly into this question. And our starting point really is that we can see that there is a lot of fragmentation, as we saw in the presentation, and also there is a great need, and there is a great need for a good exchange between policymaking and the scientific community. And we have the good examples of IPCC and IPBES, and we also have the World Ocean Assessment. But this is our starting point, to really look into where we are and see how we could move on and make things better. And I want to thank very much Tanya for the presentation. It's a lot to swallow and very, very interesting, definitely. And I really look forward to the discussions during the workshop. There are three things that struck my mind when listening to the presentation, and those were shortly said, they were the question of a scale. Because there is the global scale, we have regional scale, but also the local scale. And how does that come into play? And how does that affect all of the different questions from data to recommendations? Then there is, of course, the question of data, of the data gaps, and how do we connect that to data collection, monitoring, ocean observation, resources and infrastructure for data collection. And then the last point is this overall issue of having a proper interface between policymakers and the scientific community. Our starting point is that we are looking this from the perspective of a need of an intergovernmental organization. But nevertheless, policy making is something we want to be seen served, meaning consensus-based science, credible science, and also consideration of confidence of what is being produced. But thank you very much. I look forward to further discussions.
Yeah, we are able to take a couple of questions. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to jump in now rather than passing the buck. Laura Pereira, Global Change Institute at Wits University, Johannesburg, South Africa. Jaded ICTA's task force on scenarios and models. Remember, I think I probably start with a similar level of trauma associated to these intergovernmental processes, but I'm here nevertheless. 2 points. The first one is on scale, and I think in terms of the scope of the report, we do need to bear in mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tanya, but we were only looking at global assessments, correct? And so
some regional in the EU.
yeah, so in the EU, but we, if there's Geo has regional assessments, countries take their own sort of environmental assessments into account. So that's when you're potentially looking at more local level relevant information at that. So we're also going to bear in mind the information we're looking at and the scale that we're expecting. The second point I wanted to throw out there, and it's more just to maybe inform our thinking as we go into the afternoon and the smaller group discussions, but are we still working from a paradigm of the information deficit model, right? Which I think the IPCC has realized, that's what they started off designed around. It's like, we need to let people know that this is the crisis that is happening. We need the data, we need the information and the knowledge. But we've also clearly seen that you don't act just because we know a lot of things. So yeah, are we still working from that paradigm? Or is it that paradigm we actually need to shift in terms of how we're thinking of providing this information, the knowledge that we have?
Yes. Yeah, Patricia.
Okay, so I'm Patricia Ziveri, and I'm a research professor here at ICTA, and I'm leading a group on marine environmental biogeosciences. So I want to thank again for this initiative and for really finding all this energy to actually launch this great initiative. One of the frustration that I have with all these reports is that I have the feeling that we have a lot of information, but very little action in comparison. So it's very, very unbalanced. So I'm wondering, if we can be a bit more creative than the previous report, and now we can be more creative and more strategic and more impactful in terms of change with this type of report. Because as I said, we have a lot of knowledge. I think absolutely, I see and I completely agree. We need much more knowledge for the ocean. But how can we make use of this knowledge in a very effective way? Looking for the discussion.
Thank you, Patricia. So why not perhaps a question from policymakers? Yeah, from practitioners. Yeah, Martha.
Hello, I'm Marta Caballero. I'm from the Low Impact Fishers of Europe. So we are a network of small-scale fisheries across Europe, and trying to raise their voice and be at the policy level discussions to provide our input and so on. And I mean, it was very interesting to hear about that because we're a bit all the time aware of this kind of high level processes. So it's very interesting to learn about those because finally they will come to our communities and so on. No? So, and we were wondering, I mean, my feeling is that a lot is happening now and a lot of transitions will come now. There's the developing of the blue growth strategy, the blue economy, and so on. I mean, in Europe, there's kind of a lot of things put forward there. And I am trying to see how these processes are also going to be affected by these policies. And so if this is taken into account in these assessments, how these policies will affect as well the future of the ocean instead of being the other way around. No? So kind of, of course, we need to build this vision and see already the processes are going, how they will also be playing in these scenarios, no? And how this will also affect the communities that depend on those and so on.
I think that something you might have answered, but I think that the point that you raised and connected, Laura, saying that there are other assessment scales, but scale is an enormous issue. And I think that the IPOS would really be nice to what it's fundamental actually for us is that there needs to be a bottom-up engagement in this knowledge and a bottom-up engagement with policy. So it's got to be both top-down and bottom-up. Because right now a lot of the bigger systems are very much focused on the top-down approach, which is necessary sometimes. And I think we do need global norms, and there will be trade-offs that need to be made probably in the next 10 years. And it's not just thinking needs to be incredible, but also the application of all of this, the real life engagement is people, officials, communities with people experiencing change, and this process of moving from high-level thinking to local action is really where it's at. This is what we need to do much more effectively. We've been discussing a lot of different frameworks, and because this is a gap for sure. And we acknowledge that it's one of the issues we hope to work through together today, and some of the willingness of people in the room to think about this. So as experts.
Yeah, as not only highlighting the importance of this this moment that we start engaging with other perspectives from the issue of scale is certainly important, and there is a lot being done out there across coastal seas on participatory approaches to producing knowledge about, for instance, collaborative management of fisheries, and also in the fish chain, or like marketing fish, not only getting the fish out of the water, but the importance of having information also about the well-being of fish workers across the production from the sea to the table of people. So we really want here to expand our perspective. And it's very important that I don't have a solution that I think through these 2 days we will be able to start finding a common pathway. And hopefully, I was in New York for the UN Ocean Conference back there, where I think I saw a handful or 10 fisherfolk leaders from across the world, 2017. Last year in Lisbon, there were delegations from many countries. They were launching a call for action, I think supported even by the LIFE platform and CAOPA and other regional networks. So fishers are also coming together on higher levels and being able to represent themselves more consistently in international forums. And we hope that in Nice, in a couple of years from now, 2015, we will be able to join forces and have more leaders, and also from different sectors, not only fisherfolk, but small-scale tourist operators and so forth. So, yeah, thanks. We are very good with timing, Tanya. You did a great job. I think before breaking to coffee, perhaps we could get to know each other a little bit more. Why not? The chairs are very flexible. So if we want to see each other's face and Yeah, that's amazing. Also, people on the Zoom, our colleagues, if you want to get there. There.
Yeah, exactly.
That's much better. isn't it?
Should we roll around or?
So, we have like 20 minutes for this briefing. Yeah, thank you. So very briefly, your name, affiliation, a couple of words about your profession or what you're doing at the moment that inspires you and to be here with us. So starting with my left here, Heart, yeah. You have introduced yourself.
Well, I sort of introduced myself when I asked the question, but I'll say something more. You know, I think this is one of the things that we did that may be of relative importance to folks around is particularly with Scripps Institute of Oceanography. We had an ocean climate platform. We had the very first ocean pavilion at the COP27, you know, in the blue zone. Something that hadn't happened before. And we were surprised, you know, when I came back from the Green Climate Fund, Peter Demenickel, who is the president of the Oceanographic Institution, said, we are not doing enough to connect ocean to climate. And so we have begun that, and with Margaret Leinen, you know, joining us immediately, we had something like 20 partners, including the US National Academy of Sciences and American Geophysical Union, CNRS and IFRIMAR, and so on and so forth. And the foot traffic, and we had a session on IPOS in that pavilion as well. The foot traffic was counted, you know, of course, I was not the one to do that, but there are people who are better at those kinds of things, as several thousand, you know, 15,000 the first week and another 15 in the second week, with heads of state and government, you know, waltzing by, and then people like the directors general of international organizations taking their pictures with the ocean pavilion. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is really the importance of the oceans in the policy arena, particularly those that are interested in climate, has never been as pronounced and strong as it is now. And we are moving forward with the Dubai expedition now. Again, we have a call with Margaret, which I'll be taking from here tomorrow. So this is something that I wanted to share with you, not only because in addition to whatever that the EC and others might be doing, this is yet another opportunity to bring a lot of the decision makers at one place. And, you know, by that time, I hope we will have even more refined concept that we can promote with the member countries and moving forward with the next Beyond Ocean Conference. So this is not so much an introduction of myself, but about the idea of the Ocean Pavilion and the potential that it has. But as I said, I work for the United Nations. I work for the United Nations in various capacities in Nairobi, in Paris, in Bangkok, and in Korea. The last job that I had was with the Green Climate Fund, the $10+ billion fund to support developing countries' activities in mitigation and adaptation, focused entirely on climate. But one thing that I can share with this group is during the time that I was there as head of strategic planning and senior management team, I was talking about why are we not funding any ocean-related activities? And, you know, in the 3 years that I spent there, we did not have a single project because we can only decide on these issues when an accredited entity comes with a proposal. But I'm now pleased to tell you that GCF is firmly in this game of supporting ocean-related activities that have climate impact, starting with the coral reefs, and several $100 million worth of funding is going into that. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rama. Thanks for your insights. Laura, please, if you can just say your names, affiliations, and throw some ideas. But we don't have even less than a minute each. Otherwise, we won't have time to listen to everyone. Thanks.
You've heard me, still Lara, still from GCI. It's not from Resilience Center to wear my hat today.
Hi, I'm Jay. I'm doing my PhD at Wageningen University in the Netherlands, and I'm also part of Your Oceans Youth and Youth Biodiversity Network.
Okay, hello everyone, I'm Cristina Vitt, I'm coming from Lisbon. I work at the Center for the Humanities of Nova University in Lisbon, and I'm a marine environmentalist. And my background is on marine ecology, marine biology, and then I turned into an historian, which I have been doing for many years now. And my perspective is really, I really connect with the idea what kind of knowledge we produce or do we need, and how can we include many other ways of knowledge production and views of the world besides our mainstream scientific kind of hermetic ways. So relating as much as I can with local, traditional and indigenous communities a bit across the South Atlantic.
Thank you. Okay, so my name is Henrique. I'm a PhD student from Brazil. I'm here at ICTA for a research stay for 6 months. I'm a materials engineer. I study microplastics. I also had some experience on seaweed aquaculture in Brazil. I wanted to make a comment on that related to the collaboration with local communities. And in this project that I worked, we had some difficulties because the local people, they were skeptical with working with the academia, because they had bad experiences in the past that the collaborations led to conservation units that excluded them from their own local areas. So they knew the value that we could bring to them, but they felt excluded from the results. So that's something that I really think it's important for them.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie. I'm a marine biologist. I'm doing my PhD here at ICTA on marine plastic pollution. So I'm studying the dispersion and characterization of microplastics in the Atlantic and in the Mediterranean Sea. I think that's all on my side for now.
Hello everyone, I'm Mikael Kro. I'm one of the business group. I'm mainly focused on the marine plastic pollution, so the sources and the trade of the pollution. And in parallel, I'm working as well on the impact of climate change, on phytoplankton, and gasifiers, and yes, that's it.
Hi everyone, my name is Thiago Fossili. I PhD here in ICTA and in Prediction Project from the Polonesi. And I work marine historical ecology perspective using different techniques such as archaeology and stable isotope to investigate the development of fisheries over time in Brazilian coast.
I'm Nikki Harasta. I'm a master's student here in the Interdisciplinary Sustainability Program. And I'm currently looking at the ecosystem impacts on the ocean of offshore wind infrastructure. I also worked on MBA effectiveness assessments for 3 years in the US and marine conservation.
I'm Arturo. I'm a PhD student also. I'm from here in Catalonia. I'm doing 4 months and working on classifiers, biodiversity changes to time, and the goal on climate. Here just for curiosity. Yeah.
That's PhD student working with Patricia's group, and I'm particularly interested in the production of knowledge and the inclusive and equity perspective in the ocean environment.
I'm Dick Norris. You've heard from me before, but I'm a historical paleoecologist, and I've worked on past warm climate periods and also on much more recent kinds of impacts on the oceans. And with respect to the Ocean Pavilion, we are starting at Scripps a climate or a COP class that will talk about how the process of international negotiation works. And it would be great to have more partners. To think about maybe this something where we could train our scientific graduate students to have more understanding of how their knowledge becomes policy. It could become.
Right, my name is Andrea Colonese. I'm a research professor here at ICTA. My background is coastal environmental archaeology, but I'm actually a marine historical ecologist now. I'm particularly interested in long-term human coastal ocean system interaction, how people have transformed those systems in the past and the legacy to present day systems, and also cultural heritage management, in particular along the coast, how decision-making processes are affecting them positively and negatively. And more recently, I'm also very interested in the very early policy fiscal incentives and subsidies to industrial commercial fisheries, in particular in Latin America, and how they have impacted small-scale fisheries and created, exacerbated historical marginalizations and contributions to societal issues that we have in Latin America today. That's all.
Hello, my name is Sandra Mezaga. I'm sorry that I feel more confident if I introduce myself in Spanish, and I have the help of Marta to explain me. Yo le he realizado coordinadora profesional en el sector pesquero, desde haciendo control de gestión de satureros y ahora la comercialización en Galicia, ¿no? Además, estoy aquí en representación de ICTA, que es una red de mujeres de la pesca europea, y de mujeres salgadas, que es una asociación con carácter autonómico de Galicia, también de mujeres de la pesca, ¿no? Además, estoy realizando mi doctorado en participación pública de las mujeres del pesquero.
Okay. So she's Sandra, and she comes from Galicia. She actually worked in the management and fisheries
No, that's what several years ago.
She worked before in that and in several tuna fisheries boats, but now she's working in the network of ICTA, which is a network of fisheries in Europe, and also in the Association of Mujeres Salgadas, which is a level, is an organization of women in autonomous of Spain in Galicia. So it's a quite a big network actually. And she's now working as a doctorate in the participation, no, she's working as a PhD in the participation of public participation of women in the decision-making process. Yes.
Fisheries.
In fisheries. So she's. Well, so I'm Marta Caballé, and my background is on marine biology, but I always worked always with small-scale fisheries my whole career, and also working also with a lot of anthropologists and so on to bring kind of the participation of small-scale fisheries in decision-making processes and participatory approaches and so on. And since 2015, I'm working on the low-impact fishers of Europe, which is kind of a network of small-scale fishers in Europe. We have 32 organizations from 15 countries. So we represent a bit of 10,000 fishers from across Europe. And we try to raise their voice and also support them on the ground to be actors of change in their own rights. And I have my colleague here in the Zoom as well, Brian, which maybe will introduce himself as well.
So again, briefly, because I think we're very little time.
No, it's very good this time.
Yeah, okay, so Patricia Zveri from here, from ICTA. So I'm working on this group where we are doing we're covering many different topics related to the ocean and the marine system. So we are interested on, for example, biogeochemical cycles, mainly focusing on carbon cycles and on climate change impact and interaction with the ocean. So from ocean acidification, warming, and deoxygenation, different also temporal scales. I'm also busy with capacity building, mainly focusing on ocean acidification in Africa. And I work also with colleagues there, trying to address issues related, for example, to small-scale fisheries and impact of climate change and other stressors that are more local. And also we work on marine pollution and specifically on microplastics. I'm very interested on the link between the knowledge that we produce and the policy and how we can make this knowledge more effective towards changes. And we just, for example, completed a report for the European Parliament on marine pollution in the Mediterranean Sea with actually very specific recommendation on what needs to be done for European countries. We're doing different things. Yeah.
I'm Marianne Glaser from the Center for Marine Tropical Research in Bremen. I'm leading and concerned for decades now with social ecological systems analysis, human nature relations, focused on the coastal and ocean realm. And our institute, the ZMT, has a focus on coastal and ocean sustainability, and we're the only institute that does that for the coastal and ocean realm. So I'm really excited to be at ICTA now, where you have a similar sort of position. I've been involved with kind of global ocean and coastal issues through Future Earth Coast, that used to be LOICS, on the scientific steering committee, through IMBA, where I was vice chair, and also as chair of the German Human Ecology Society. Our work currently has two big projects that are related to ocean sustainability. One on ocean conflicts, which is 7 sites globally, where we look at ocean conflicts very much from a perspective of communities and regions, and focus in Brazil and Bangladesh is what we do at the ZMT. There are other institutes involved. The other project is on the South Pacific, several regions, and on the embeddedness of fisheries in further ocean sort of dynamics. And I wanted to close with one observation on this process, and maybe that's there, but we have, Tanya has said there's a very fragmented approach to ocean knowledge, and tasks are distributed, it's classical. On the other hand, it's sort of a little bit everywhere in the assessments, but not to sufficient depth. If you looked at this sort of sociologically, the other way, you could say, oh, it's a transversal theme. 70% of the territory of the earth is sort of everywhere, and we also need to value that. And on the other hand, the huge big gaps, the gaps in social and economic knowledge, in knowing how management even affects the ocean, leave alone the communities. There's a need for innovative approaches, and of course, there's a blatant lack of actually effective social science data application and communication of the results. And I'm really excited to be here to work on that. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Graham Morton. I'm here at ICTA, the UAB, and also the Department of Geography here. Although I originally come from California, I was schooled at the Scripps Institution, where Dick comes from. I never spent any time at Woods Hole, but it was in California where my love of the oceans was born, I would say, and that probably had a lot to do with eventual academic lines of research. I think listening to Tanya, especially this morning, I felt like we were all sort of feeling probably there was this sort of plethora of negative aspects of lack of coordination and so forth. And I think we can all sort of imagine how that comes from and why. But how to solve it seems such an enormous task. And I think that's where the movement to action very often sort of stops or doesn't continue therefore. I remember a project, for example, I worked on this Ocean 2K project, and one of the key expressions we had at every meeting, at the end of every Skype meeting we had during prior to the pandemic time, was action item. And somehow if we could turn all of our collective frustrations into some form of action items that are useful to policymakers, I think that would be fantastic. Another thing I strongly feel, I've long been very passionate about the oceans for recreation, most notably swimming and surfing and stand-up paddle and these things. And I believe very strongly in engagement of young people, especially through enjoyment of waterways for recreation through possibilities like stand-up paddle, for example. And I think I remember during the pandemic, there was this fantastic online seminar I listened to from this guy at Stanford, an Indian American guy, who was all about citizen science and very active sort of engagement of youth through experimentation processes. I think he came from the bioengineering department there, but it was one of the most inspiring talks I remember being part of in terms of engaging youth and building knowledge and care and, passion about the environment, because really maybe that's one of the avenues we could sort of work on collectively approaching. I would like to see concerted activity towards that. Thank you.
Morning all. I'm Arnaud. I work with CNRS, which is the French Public Multidisciplinary Research Institute. I was trained as a chemist and a material scientist, but for over 15 years, I worked to strengthen international scientific collaborations with Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean. I work with the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the CNRS Department of International Affairs. For a bunch of time, I was based in Taipei, Taiwan, which means the edge of the Pacific Ocean, in the midst of uncertain seas and in a rich and complex multicultural environment. For 3 years now, I've been working with the CNRS Chief Science Officer on cross-cutting coordination for research to tackle societal issues and challenges, which generally calls for multidisciplinary or transdisciplinarity, which in turn challenges our institutions. And for a few months, so Françoise and I have known each other for quite a long time now, but for a few months, I worked with Françoise, with her IPOS colleagues, to help advance a collective agenda for IPOS and raise CNRS contributions towards this aim. And that's it. And before I give the floor, I have one request for our lucky English native speakers. Just speak, if you can, just slightly slower than usual, so we can really enjoy all you have to share. And thanks André, Leopoldo, and the ICTA team for having us today.
Hi everyone, I'm Samia Salim. I'm a postdoc at the Leibniz Tropical Center for Marine Research with Marion, working on this, our global project on marine conflicts. And so in Bangladesh, the work I do is on marine conflicts related to blue economy, looking at loss of livelihoods, small-scale fishers, displacements of work. I'm also, I live in Bangladesh. I'm a director and a professor at University of Liberal Arts Bangladesh, where I had their Center for Sustainable Development. And there, in the last 6 years that I've been living in Bangladesh, I've been working a lot on working with small-scale fishers in the coastal belt of Bangladesh on climate resilience, adaptation, and really that's my passion developed on how bringing those local voices, their lives and their narrative on this global platform as we talk about resilience, climate change, sustainability. Just also wanted to add that, I was at COP27 and spoke at the Ocean Pavilion. And again, I found it really inspiring. And that's where I spoke about, the local fishers that I work with and these global models we have on predictions. How can they be using data? How do we make it, relevant for them? So not just bringing their voices to these decision-making, but even what we're talking about at the higher level, how do you, make it relevant for them? So that's really my and yeah, really excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Samia. Now let's listen to our colleagues following up on Zoom. I see Brian's face. Hi, Brian. Could you open the floor, the virtual floor?
Good morning, everybody. Nice to be here with you. Very interesting presentations this morning. Quite in the deep ocean compared to the usual shallow seas that small-scale fishers are used to working in. I'm a colleague of Marta Cavallé, who spoke earlier and described very well the kind of work we're doing. My own journey has been quite a varied one, starting off in technical cooperation projects in different countries of the world, Latin America, Africa, Asia, and then coming to Brussels. Belgium is my home country now, and I'm proud to be a Belgian citizen after the Brexit. I'm a Brexit refugee here in Belgium. And since coming to Brussels in the late 1990s, I've worked to try and create space for small-scale fisheries and space for small-scale fishers themselves to make their own voices heard in discussions around international relations on fisheries agreements, particularly between the European Union and third countries in Africa and Indian Ocean particularly. I'm an advocate, been an advocate in FAO, Code of Conduct, and working on the guidelines for small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty reduction. And I'm now totally focused on small-scale fisheries in Europe. Excuse my dog, sorry, they're very excited about something. Thank you, that's it from me. But nice to be here. Thank you, Gonz. Thank you, Leopoldo, for setting this up and inviting us.
Thanks, thank you, Brian. Yeah, Maria, would you like to jump again?
Well, yes, I can tell a little bit about what I do, about my background. So I currently work in a unit that is dealing with multilateral cooperation. So, for example, we had the negotiation team from the Commission that was taking part in the BBNJ negotiations, are my close colleagues here. I've worked here for the past about 1.5 years. My past background is in marine science, but that was a long time ago. Since then, I have been working in member state administration, environment administration, very much working with EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive implementation, coordinating that, but very much also in regional sea scale. So the Baltic Sea in particular is my playing field, and I've taken part in developing the assessment system there and the whole sort of chain from data, coordination of data collection to assess indicators to assessments. And I've chaired one process for a holistic assessment of the Baltic Sea. So I quite well know the assessment issues from there. And also for the UN, I took part in the ad hoc group for marine litter that preceded the work that is now ongoing for the negotiations for a plastics agreement. And also I've taken part in the UN Ocean conferences and coordinated one country's contribution and participation. But anyways, assessments, monitoring, all of that is very much to my heart and holistic approach. And I like difficult things, so it's very good to be here today.
Andrei, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Obrigado, Leopoldo. Muchas gracias. Thank you for the invitation. Sally, Françoise, once again, good to be with you. My name is Andrei Poljak. I work for the Brazilian Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. I have been dealing with polar and ocean sciences for many years now, always from the governmental perspective. And I have been following, and as Maria might relate, we need to do everything all the time, everywhere. So we follow all the issues essentially that deal with ocean science. So that became very dear to my heart. And I have been contributing with the idea behind IPOS for quite some time now. And I'm always the dog in the room, bringing another perspective. I became very passionate about a theme, a new research field, which is called science diplomacy. or the interaction between science and international relations. And in that particular case, we always tend to see, and I keep hearing this narrative this morning. Thank you, Tanya, for this wonderful presentation, and kudos on your assessment done so far on the assessment. But the narrative that we are always seeking solution-oriented science, and that the science should inform policymakers, keeps building this opposition between both. And I think that, as the colleague said this morning, we need to be more creative about that, and we need to recognize the power that science can exercise in international relations, as we have recently seen during the BBNJ negotiations for almost 20 years. There was a big discrepancy between Global South and Global North in terms of how we perceive the ocean globally, how we want the ocean to move forward. And those conflicting views were based on a different interest that countries had on exploring the ocean, not always on sustainably exploring, but exploring the ocean. And that brought a very distinction between positions, and those positions were very similar to the very own negotiation of the Convention on the Law of the Sea that happened 30 plus years ago, no, more now, 60 plus years ago. So in that case, we must not be naive on the role that science plays in advocating for certain positions. So I am always the one bringing that up. We need to be actually looking at how we can balance scientific capacities in terms of, if we are to deliver information, why shouldn't we be opening a dialogue between what is thought to be science today and what you perceive as policymakers? So I am on the other end of the rope, but I am also an academic. So that's why in the middle I stand. So thank you. Hope to contribute this time again.
Thank you, Andre. Yes, Lucas, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for organizing this very important event. So I'm currently working with Françoise on the IPOS project for the soon-to-be created Ocean Sustainability Foundation as a project manager on the IPOS ID. And yeah, my academic background is more on international relations, international security. I've worked for different NGOs on advocacy, and I've also worked particularly for the Ocean and Climate Platform for 6 months, and started to work with Françoise a few months ago. And very glad to see this first dedicated event on the IPOS, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucas. Cecile?
Yes. Let me just turn my video. Hi everyone. My name is Cécile Brugère. I am a freelance consultant and researcher. My little company is called Soulfish Research and Consultancy. And at the moment, I am working with Leopoldo and Andre in the ERC Tradition project that is organizing this event. I'm very interested in ocean sustainability. My background is in economics, ecological and agricultural economics. I used to work for the Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome as a fisheries and aquaculture officer. And in this work, I liaised a lot with policymakers, supported policymakers in policymaking for sustainable aquaculture development. But since working as a freelance consultant, I've been working mostly on small-scale fisheries and all the human dimensions behind small-scale fishing. So gender equality, improved governance, and so on, to make sure that the rights of small-scale fishers are respected. And also in 2021, I was a contributor to the World Ocean Assessment of 2021. So I am really interested, at all these interactions between those different assessments and IPOS idea is great, and I completely support it. One thing that personal thing that I can say is that, yeah, personally, I am quite concerned by what I am witnessing in relation to the development of blue economies around the world. And I'm concerned by, I've witnessed it firsthand, you know, as a consultant when I go to different countries. I'm concerned by how hard hearing, say, the policymakers are with you know, listening to the and taking into account the place that small-scale fishers and marginalized people around coastlines you know, are not taken into account and ignored in those blue economy developments are mostly focalized on you know, shipping, tourism, exploitation, and so on. And I would really like the IPOS to, you know, to bring these concerns to the front, and in particular the voices of the marginalized people around the coastlines who do depend on the ocean for their livelihoods. So I look for, I'm really interested in, yeah, I think this assessment overview you've started is excellent, and I look forward to hearing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. Please, Javier, introduce yourself briefly, and if you can show us your face, if you don't mind, otherwise we're hearing you. Javier, are you there? If not, while Javier sets up, Maria del Carmen.
She wrote a message that she
Is she? Okay. Eva Leal. Okay, no worries. Johan Robinson, are you there? That's great.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Johan. Let me see why my camera is not coming on.
We don't hear you very well.
Acoustics is bad.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I'm Johan Robinson. I work for UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. I head the Ecosystem Integration Branch. Why are we interested in this IPOS idea is that within our branch, we've got the Regional Seas Program, and 6 of the regional seas are administered directly by the branch. So we see a very clear link to this ocean sustainability. And on the regional seas, we really work through a whole spectrum of science, policy, and practice interface. And we think this panel on ocean sustainability we're just interested in to see how the two different frameworks or platforms, the panel and the regional seas can cooperate and work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Johan. I think we've managed to get a sense that he's working with UNEP, right?
Yeah.
Original
Good ears.
Thanks a lot. Sheikh Sharif.
Yes, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah, sorry, my video is not coming on this morning, but my name is Sheikh Sharif. I'm from Liberia, West Africa, and I work as a technical consultant to the National Fisheries and Aquaculture Authority, and also provide support to the World Bank and firms from South Africa and Southampton in the UK for an economic and feasibility study to develop an investment guide for the sector. I'm also the co-chair of the Ocean Acidification Africa Network and support the Environmental Protection Agency as an advisor to the government on marine and coastal issues. And I've been working with a colleague with you there, Patricia Ziviri, for over 5-6 years on different issues relating to ocean acidification, promoting awareness and research in Africa. But my main interest is promoting and managing fisheries enforcement and management in the West Africa fisheries, and I've worked in a couple of countries here in providing social support. And I joined the program this morning late and just ending the first presentation, and I'm keen to see how the outcome of this very important 2 days meeting turned out, and look forward to interacting with most of you further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chef. Thanks a lot. Wow, we have a brilliant and very diverse team of think tanks on ocean sustainability, I can see. And we have about 10 people also following us on YouTube. 2 of them have introduced themselves. One is Thais Macedo and the other Daniele Herbst. Both are based in ICTA. Thais is currently doing research on changes in small-scale fisheries and marine protected areas effectiveness in Cabo Verde, Cape Verde. And Daniele is working with Tradition, our team. She's doing historical ecology, about 200 years of evolution of small-scale fisheries in Brazil. So I think we are set with the introductions. It was a very, very interesting session to hear the amount of experience. Myself, I'm a oceanographer, also working with ethnoecology, small-scale fisheries, coastal and marine governance, and currently joined with Andrea Tradition Project and ICTA as a postdoc researcher. We're gamifying, turning a social, participatory social network mapping technique into a game to help small-scale fishers to engage with blue economy development. So it's a game that helps them to strategize and learn more about how to navigate the complexity of coastal governance and development. So with that, I conclude. Patricia, Luis. Sorry,
Hi, Eloise. I'm a Maria de Maestro postdoc here at ICTA, and I am a paleoceanographer and geochemist. And I look mostly at the North Atlantic Ocean and how ocean circulation in the past has affected CO2 in the atmosphere. Yeah.
Thanks, Luis. Also for helping us on the Zoom session. So we have a breakout now. Do you want to throw a few words?
Sure. So you all know me by now. I'm Cape Town, South Africa, and been very involved in this project for 2 years. My background was commercial law initially, and then I shifted from commercial law into the marine sector in the last few years, and mostly work in international governance policy space. I like big picture thinking, which is why I'm involved in a project that has very big picture vision. Very passionate about the ocean, and I really believe that even though it seems super hard, there is the possibility of catalyzing the energy again. And we're in a moment, and someone said that earlier, I think, because not you, but that we're in a moment at the moment where the ocean suddenly gained attention. I think this is the time to re-energize the system that's been quite slow and to really move on. I'm very excited that we can do it together. And thank you so much to ICTA for hosting us. Very kindly, really appreciate it.
That's fine.
No, yes, Tanya said all the word that I need to say. But especially the fact that I am very glad to be here, because the idea was born in between the north and the south. And this will be the first event where we can share also the way we will have to construct that. Thank you very much.
So for coffee, do you want to give us some instructions?
Instructions?
We're gonna have lunch served here at 12:30 in a proper course of break at 3:30. But for now, we have a coffee machine, I'm sorry, in the kitchen. And I'll make sure that tomorrow we have some coffee. in the morning as well. So we have a kitchen, cook machine, water over there. And I'm gonna show them and I will.
Yeah, and please, 10 minutes, okay?
Yeah, it's only really fun.
Right.
Only naive That's a continuing with this conversation. I get them to go to the bathroom.
This is like in a way.
And
I think they want to be part of it.
Bom dia. Bem, bom, tá tudo certo. O seu hotel é muito longe? Ah, que pena que não ficou com o pessoal. Ah, você foi em Barcelona. Ah, nossa. E a gente tira o. Gracias. Gracias. Espero que sea aprender inglés. Espero que tu inglés es muy bueno.
Sí, todo. Pero me cuesta hablar, ¿no? Porque menudo y siento que no voy a poder estar. Pero bueno, poco me suelto.
Oh. Es tu opción, claro.
Sí, no. Sí, me da miedo que aquí no me. Entonces,
No.
Because of the really important.
She's following everything.
Yeah, that's the connection that has never been made.
True. Yeah. And we have also Nicolas, you know.
Yeah, but he was
He was supposed to be arriving now in Barcelona airport, and
we're in the meeting yesterday together.
he just got here. 2 minutes. He landed.
We were in a meeting yesterday together. So we've been here for Barcelona.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
That's cool. You're gonna send him the address here. So you just it's at least the address.
No. Não. Amanhã vamos trazer uma provincial. Eu já um pouco essa conversa ainda bem que o
Agora, depois da rodada, ficou 15 minutos atrasado. Mas tá bom, né? 15 minutos tá. E foi importante essa conexão.
Foi, eu adorei. Agora estou pensando uma coisa.
Eu acho que de apresentação, muita gente trouxe. Mas vai ter muito tempo depois disso.
Será que a Cecília não quer também? Já tem que trazer a Cecília.
Você mandou o link, tá?
Muitas coisas para ver. Bastante bem. Não, eu expliquei. Uma coisa muito. Uma coisa, a gente vai fazer um almoço aqui, depois a gente volta.
5 minutos, se quiser. Pessoal. Não,
Thank you so much. I just realized that it's a dream for organizing this morning. One of the things. We have an extra one. No, I feel a little bit bad that we don't have to do.
Não tem água fora?
Tem água, mas seria legal ter uns copos
Sim.
para eles não tomar. Aí, vou pagar. Amanhã eu trago água.
Não? Pode ir. Eu ia falar, precisa. Cola bastão.
Cola bastão, ok.
Coisa bem. Dá uma olhada aqui.
Tô ligado.
A gente fez aqui.
Você quer que eu vou pegar coisa?
Eu botei os nossos materiais do projeto ali. Amanhã, né? Isso vai ser mais amanhã. Tem que ver se alguém pode ajudar a cortar isso. Cortar isso. X.
Vou pedir para o pessoal que pois é, cara. Vocês têm que cortar. Tem que cortar. Mas isso aqui tem que cortar assim?
Não, esse daqui não. Esse daqui individualmente, cada fichinha, você fichinha.
Tem que cortar assim? Pode cortar assim?
Não vai ficar tão bem acabadinho, né? Assim, eu acho que redondo não vai ficar bem acabado também. Não? Difícil isso. É muita coisa?
Claro, o Guilherme trabalha aqui na parte dele.
Sim. Bem, cheio de gente. Eu não sei se estão vendo gente.
Não, é muito.
Mas tem muita gente importante assim.
Não sempre com o trabalho que nós aqui, ou a gente pode levar para casa.
Amanhã,
não. Hay que cortar un poco de cosas, teniendo las instrucciones del juego, que hay que cortar perfecto. Yo creo, no lo sé, después no se puede hacer. Tenemos que cortar y dejarnos separados.
Estas coisas separadas.
E isso, como se corta? Está vendo? Aqui?
Não precisa pode ser.
E isso foi. Podem realizar todos. Acabou. Eu distribuí de modo ético aqui. E este aqui.
A urna. Professores para amanhã, né?
Poderia ser de manhã, para ela, pelo menos. Vai estar líquida? Não?
Pero eu corto um pouco. É mais ou menos da mais longa de edição, né?
Só isso. Voy a dar um pouco para.
Sim, não tem tipo uma guilhotina aqui no ICTA, tá vendo? E aí tu.
Eu acho que é muito bonito. Já certo.
Sim.
Tem que estar na primeira planta, não? Tem que ir lá. Só que a primeira planta. Na primeira planta, eu esqueci. Aqui, tem pessoa, parece que aí há.
E aí, eu Where's the Zoom?
Vale, bueno, ahora sí como me enseño. Okay, so the routines y entonces se divertirá, no lo queréis, no. Léo, tu que tem mais confiança com esse pessoal, tu vai lá pescar eles?
Vou, só tô vendo aqui quando. Zoom. That's channel that stays.
No es mucho.
No.
Pero.
Yeah.
You can see what is on.
Hello. Yes, I'm sorry for the. There was one thing that I did not thought about was to do this. But now we're like 15 minutes behind schedule, but I think it was so important this session to get a sense of who's in the room. It was really people also getting more relaxed with their contributions.
I think so.
Mhm.
It's really great. Especially we couldn't hear your hand.
Yeah.
Because what he said was actually quite important.
I couldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, 3rd of April, regional Swiss program here.
Oh, wow. That's the one that Rose was not yet.
No, no,
No, another
on the Zoom meet.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Comes back and it's very big. It's a very big support from you.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it has been boosted by the agenda of machines.
I'm not interested in my class.
Not interested.
It
It
is
is,
very
oh, yeah,
interesting.
very interesting. Yeah,
No, I had such a good interview.
I was
Yes.
really impressed with
Yes.
the quality of people on the ground.
Yeah. And yes, I think it's great. It's important that they're supporting this. What next? It's
Yes, so it's insights 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
Then another question and answers, and then we're done for lunch. I'm sorry, also. Huh?
This function was so long. Not
Ah.
as big.
Oh, cool. Then it's in there. Yeah. You're trying to see. Oh, she comes. Your computer is. Should I close? Can I just?
Thank you.
Wow. It was a good session, good start,
Yes,
huh?
great.
I'm sorry for the slides.
No, that's wonderful. Yes, I think it's
Impressive quality of people.
yes, perfect.
That's good.
Thank you so much.
No, I thank you for the opportunity to work
Yes,
together again. Also
Yes,
remember,
yes.
when we first met, you were, it was in New York, and you were coming down the stairs and looking where to go, and then you asked me,
Yes.
where's the session? I said, and afterwards came Ocean Camp.
Yes, you remember.
Impressively.
How
Very,
long
really
will
happy.
you stay in Barcelona?
Only till December. I have a short-term contract. So,
Oh, you know more?
now, if I am able to fundraise, I'm currently also opening for.
So are you waiting for a position somewhere?
Yeah, no, not really. I'm applying. In
Yeah.
Brazil, for science and technology is very complicated at the
Yes.
moment. We're coming out of a very exquisite government. And it might take a couple of years since we get back on track for investment in universities and so forth. So,
Okay. So you are searching for other
Yeah.
countries and
Yeah.
other university?
Yeah.
But it's good to know.
Oh, yes, yeah, keep me on the radar.
But I thought that you were staying more than 2 years here.
I'm here until December. My contract actually is until April, so after the Barcelona UNESCO conference currently, but we are applying You back? Shall we start?
Yeah, you almost didn't come back.
We could have stayed for another house.
So we are almost all on board again. See lots of talks and getting to know each other, ideas flying here, flying there. I'm just waiting for our colleagues to come in and we can restart. Do we want to remain in a circle, Tanya? What do you suggest? Or yeah. So just feel comfortable. However you like.
Yes, I was thinking in front of me for that. I didn't embarrass me, but I didn't know what to go with.
So the audio for the observers. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to start again. So just to remember where we were looking at these 6 elements that we're going to work on in our breakout groups after lunch. And we discussed the first 3. So now we're going to go through the second 3 of these results. So this is the one that Maria was talking about earlier. And what few of us have mentioned in the room is how do we manage this interface with policymakers? One of the questions was, how involved are policymakers in the scoping process and in the terms of reference for scoping processes, and also how do they feel about it? And these are some of the insights that we got from our interviewees. So this was quite interesting. The very first starting point for IPOS is to ask the question, what do you need from us? It seems obvious, but I'm not really sure it's being done by anyone else. So it needs to be demand driven. And I think this is the message we were getting from a few people this morning as well, is that who are we answering with this work, and who are we actually targeting the knowledge? And primarily, we do need to engage with policymakers because they make the governance and make the changes in the systems that need to be changed. But we also need to be engaging with other stakeholders and communities. So this question is repeated here. Who is this for? Who's going to give it legitimacy? Because they are the ones that must feed into the scoping process. And this is where the voices of small-scale fishers and communities, I think, are very important. The link remains extremely superficial in most cases between science and policy. Another interesting comment from one of the experts was that the scoping in terms of reference should be a living process, that these very rigid scoping processes that are drafted up front are necessary to create structure and framework, but often issues are, issues evolve, and as research continues, new issues come up, and it should be a living process that can be adapted. For me, this was very powerful. There are things that scientists want policymakers to know, but very often it's an inconvenient. They don't, and it's around, what questions are we asking? And do we really want to know the answers? Because often with policymakers, they don't really want all the answers. and actually the scientists really want to tell them the truth. So it's very interesting. And then it should be a two-way process. And this comes up a lot with the policymakers, is that they feel they don't have a sense of ownership of the products that come out. There's a sense of, this is not my document. It had nothing to do with me. I wasn't engaged in it. And I will refer to it when I have to. This is what feedback is from these people. So And I mean, this would be even more true in any other interface at local scale level. Which are the reports that are most commonly used? Quite interesting. This was across the board with scientists, policymakers, politicians. Almost everybody used the IPCC first, then IPBS, then a combination of other reports, a mix, and then World Ocean Assessment. SARAC on its own, which if you combine that with IPCC, shows you how much is IPCC, and then the GEO6. So quite interesting. There's a very heavily weighted usage of IPCC first, and then IPBES second. IPCC has probably got the most effective science policy interface. There are a lot of rounds of negotiations, at least 3 rounds of negotiations and workshops and feedback loops. And Francoise, I don't know if you want to have any input in that. And also post-report presentations. IPBES also has a very strong science policy interface and strong stakeholder engagement process. I find this interesting that International Resources Panel has actually got a very, very strong interface with science and policy. They have enormous impact. The International Resource Panel is used by the G7, by G20. It's been very influential in policy, but it only was mentioned by 2 interviewees. So it's just strange anomalies that come up. You know, this is a report that's actually very influential, but only mentioned by 2. And then regional assessments continue to play a very important role. And this is the point Laura made earlier in her comment, is that we're looking at mostly global environmental assessments here, but of course regional programs are still very important. And I think that what we missed with Johan, unfortunately, because we couldn't hear him, Johan Robertson he's at UNEP and the head of the Global Environmental Fund for Land and Biodiversity. And he has set up a meeting with the regional seas programs for us in about a week's time, with the heads of all the regional seas programs, to see how IPOS can interface with regional seas programs and engage at that level, which was, we have to do some cascading down at different levels. Okay, the presentation of results to policymakers. So how are the results presented to policymakers? I mean, we know that we have the SPMs, summaries for policymakers, that are generally with all the reports. Often, policymakers are saying they're too complicated. Even the summaries, they want summaries of summaries. They want it in plain language. And you know, I know it's probably very frustrating for scientists, because scientists want to give all of the information. It's so important. But I also understand as a lawyer how difficult it is to draft legislation. When you draft a new piece of legislation or regulation, you have to be so careful with the words you use, because they are subject to interpretation. And definitions particularly are very important, because if it's interpreted in the way you don't intend, the law has a different impact and it's not used in the way you intend. So you need to understand, as a policymaker, you really need to understand what the scientists say. You can't have a sort of vague idea. You really need to get it. So some of the policymakers' perspectives is, we know the ocean is degrading, but we're not going towards implementing to the end. In other words, we're not implementing the change. One of them said, we're going to start asking for reports from scientific committees and not from assessments, because they're too generic, they're too dense, it takes too long. Somebody else, yeah, we need a summary of summaries. The reports are too long and too complicated. So generally, we can get a sense from this that it's not optimal. The science policy interface is not optimal. There is a lot of frustration on the scientist side, where they say they're spending their entire life pouring their hearts into their work and nothing changes. And then there's a frustration from policymakers saying, we're getting all these reports on our desk, but we can't use them. They're too long, they're too thick, we don't understand them, we don't know what to do with them. So it comes back to this point of action, which we mentioned earlier, is how do we implement this? How do we make it useful? And one of the ways is through briefings for COPs. But I think that's an important point to note for the oceans, that we don't have that because we don't have a COP for the ocean. And the way that the IPCC gets such big traction is that there is a COP and that they can brief negotiators on the science. There's an opportunity to brief negotiators, but we don't have an ocean COP. And so we're not briefing our politicians on the ocean in the same way. There's no prep in the same way that there is for climate. Okay, what kind of summaries are prepared for the general public? And this, I think, is very interesting. One of the reports that does it well is the International Resources Panel. They have their reports, they have summaries for policymakers, for business, they have infographics which are easy to read. They have nice storylines on their website, very good website, and they have videos. Most of the other reports are quite limited in what they do. But communication strategies is absolutely critical to shift the narrative. We know this from transition theory, that if you want to shift or change societal norms, if you want to shift a narrative, you need to be informing people, and people need to start understanding that ocean is an existential threat on a par with climate change. It's as important. It needs to become part of our daily reality, that we're aware that ocean actually runs our planet. So communication of the knowledge, of the findings, of actions to the public is very important. So one of the policymakers said, we have the tragedy of the commons unfolding. There's not enough awareness. I'm sure you all know what that means, that we own this collective ocean, but nobody's doing anything. And no one's actually doing anything to stop the tragedy unfolding. We need to translate findings into a language that's understandable for all people, for non-experts. Reports need to be action-oriented. Decisions need to be made now to address problems as soon as possible. And some of the reports, as I said, have great communication, but in future, this needs to be a major priority. Whatever work we do in the IFOS, communication and the way we get the message out has to be a major focus. Okay, some of the interviewees' perspectives. Communication and outreach is critical, but we do need a degree of autonomy to be able to communicate inconvenient truths. And remember at the beginning, we spoke about, should this be intergovernmental or independent? And this is where that autonomy comes into play, because if you're a very tightly controlled institution, you can't necessarily always communicate the inconvenient truths. And one of the reasons that the Montreal Agreement was so effective in the ozone layer was because people perceived it as an existential threat. It was communicated as an existential threat, and then to shift from society towards that, but we haven't had that with the ocean. And transitions occur when social norms shift. So we have a responsibility to communicate the risk of business as usual. One of the interviews was with Ocean Health Index, and they spent 30 to 40% of their total budget on communication, which is an enormous amount. The high-level panel, which is one of the processes we haven't yet assessed, but it's one that we will do before we close the report, did a very good job on communication, on the whole strategy and on the individual information units that came out of it. And we need something that is stripped down with, it's not stripped down with only political priorities. This actual truth is very watered down in each report. So this was from one of the top scientists in the world. The actual truth is very stripped down in these reports. So the measurements of policy uptake, this is really important. How do we know if what we're doing has any impact? If all of this knowledge and all of this action actually does anything. And there are a couple of tools which are actually doing this. Ocean Health Index provides a tool to measure policy impact. It's a very composite tool. So some of the scientists don't like it because they say they want to know what's behind the number, because it's almost too generic, too composite. But it means that the architecture has already been built to assess the ocean. And Ocean Health Index is being used in the Baltic Sea at the moment with HELCOM to assess whether
actions that have been implemented, policies that have been implemented are having any result. The government of Colombia engaged with Ocean Health Index and actually changed some of their legislation and their processes so that they could develop indicators to feed into Ocean Health Index. So they could actually assess whether the policies were having an impact and whether their ocean health was improving. So, and also used in the Gulf of Maine. ISC, very interesting tool, International Science Council, developed a tool for policy on COVID. So it's a fascinating online tool. You can type into the tool which country at which time, and it will tell you what policy was implemented by that country at that time and what impact that had on reducing numbers of COVID. So for me, that's very inspiring because it means that from an architectural point of view, we already have ways of measuring impact. And we should be doing this more. We should be assessing the quality of our impact, of policy impacts. And there are tools that we can use. Very importantly, the IPCC, in conjunction with UNFCCC, of course, but they have provided a basis for NDCs, for countries having to commit or project their targeted greenhouse gas emissions. And that's been very powerful, bringing climate into the political arena and making it a focus. And we need to do that more for the ocean. NDCs, yeah.
The acronyms, you can spell them out.
Okay. What is an NDC again, Laura? Nationally determined contribution. Nationally determined contribution. So in the Paris Agreement, the UNFCCC, Paris Agreement has a mix of, let's call it like a creme brulee, a hard layer and a soft layer. And there's some procedural elements that you have to comply with, and there's the creme brulee underneath part, which is it's non-obligatory, but it's actually been very powerful, that mix, and it's how they got the Paris agreements through, was that what the whole thing wasn't super rigid. So NDCs are a voluntary commitment by countries to agree to targets of their greenhouse gas emissions, to agree to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And it's a way of kind of naming and shaming a little bit as well, because countries have to put it on the table and say, this is what we commit to. It hasn't been as ocean focused, but some of the countries.
Just one qualification, it is voluntary.
Yes.
Because you're not told to do X,
yeah.
But once you announce it, it's
yes.
obligated.
Yes. Yes. So it's a very powerful tool because it does call countries to actually make commitments. And we need to do more of that for the ocean. So 75% of small island developing states do have ocean commitments in their NDCs, but only 1/3 of developed countries. So this is something that we should be working on to get more ocean commitments into NDCs. And I know with our ocean conference, there are voluntary ocean commitments as well. But I think this is a very strong, powerful tool that we could use. One of the questions that comes up with this is around indicators. So if we're going to start making commitments, how do we create measurable indicators? And this has been a scientific debate that's been going on for several years with essential ocean variables, essential biodiversity variables, and how we actually agree on targets for the ocean. I know policymakers are very keen for commitments for, like a 1.5 degree for climate, something similar to that for the ocean. The challenge with that, of course, is that the ocean, it's different wherever you're measuring it because there are different dynamics and different geographies at play. But the ocean biodiversity variables have been developed, and I know, Laura, you've done a lot of work on this. Do you want to say anything about that?
We'll leave it for discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the measurability component is tricky because a lot of the things that we care about aren't that easily measurable. Cultural connection, equity is a little bit easier to get in, but it's still sort of difficult to disaggregate. You want to understand what's happening in place, but a lot of these function at the global level, right? So that's where a lot of the trickiness resides.
Okay. It's I think it's all this. Okay, Some of the insights from the assessment, just broad insights on ocean health. Regeneration is possible. We know this. If we protect the ocean and we give it time, it can recover. The degree of protection matters. So there's a new paper by Giacomo and Joachim was part of that paper from the CNRS, which shows that the very highly protected MPA actually has much stronger impacts and much stronger, even economic impacts for the areas surrounding it. Local community buy-in and integration is key for success. All of these initiatives have to be implemented at the local scale, and that is where the rubber hits the road. And there's such a lovely example in Kenya, in Kuruwitu, where an MPA, the first MPA was started, I think in 2003. They call it a locally managed marine area. One man started it in conjunction with an NGO. They started with 30 hectares of ocean, which is tiny. And within 6 years, they had 200% improvement in fisheries abundance and 30% increase in hard corals. And all of the areas around it, the fishermen's incomes doubled. And that was a very small piece of ocean. So it's very inspiring. It gives us a sense of what is actually possible. There's some other success stories in the EU. Fish stocks have rebounded enormously after governance and regulations. The ban on whaling was spectacularly successful for some of the population of whales in the Pacific. I've explained to you about Ocean Health Index. So I think what it leaves me with is a sense of there is hope. If we actually have really good policy that's informed by good knowledge and it's implemented at a local scale, there is hope. The ocean can actually survive and recover. So some of the comments that one of the questions at the end of interviews was I asked the interviewees, if you had a magic wand and you could design anything you wanted for the ocean, what would that look like? What would you do? And these are some of the takeaways. We live in an interconnected and interdependent system, individual and collective responsibility that has enormously increased. Stewarding the ocean is a tremendous challenge. We have north versus south. We have coastal waters and areas beyond national jurisdiction. We have issues of inclusivity and issues of the responsibility to future generations. And so we have Jay here from Euroocean's Youth, because we really want to include the youth along the way, this whole process, along with other stakeholders. So we need a systems approach. We need a transdisciplinary approach. We need scenarios for the medium and long term. We need foresight elements for future uses, and we need coverage of data gaps. These are some of the outcomes of the interviews. Other ones that I thought were interesting were, we need a communication tool that comes out once a year, and that would be useful for the World Ocean Assessment. We need one place to go for sound scientific information. We need short reports with integrated approach on topics. And we need to help people understand that the link that they have with their ocean is so important for their future. So some nice, some nice outcomes from interviews if they could do anything they wanted, which is what we're going to do this afternoon. We're going to dream. So where does all of this leave us? We have this one ocean of ours, which actually, our Earth is mostly ocean. This is the high seas, and these are EEZs. Interestingly, I can't see it because that's in the way, but 62% of EEZs are in the global south. We need coordinated transdisciplinary and inclusive science. Current assessments are too siloed and not sufficiently inclusive or transparent. We have done a lot of work on this, which I haven't spoken about today, was around transparency of processes in our assessment, but we couldn't cover everything today, but in the way that people are selected, in the way that reports, the approval processes, reports go through, etc. We have too much fragmentation and too many gaps. Science policy interface is fragile and needs improvement. And ocean knowledge needs to be available to all ocean users and ocean actors. So that's where we are. This afternoon, we're going to get together in our groups, and we're going to take those 6 elements that I went through and design our own ideal iPass together. Any questions, other issues?
Yes, we have about 10 minutes for some questions. Laura, please take it.
Just again, as I said before, things to reflect on for the afternoon. The first question I have is, who are these policymakers? Because you have generally environmental negotiators sitting in the room with you, right? But they're not the ones, they're not treasury, right? Actually making the finance allocation resources. So it's linked to this information deficit question. Like even when we know things, even when we put in the policy, we still don't implement it in many instances because power is real and those dynamics in politics are real. So is there a way we can help with that? It also, that power dimension links into the Montreal Protocol, and I encounter a little bit that it was because it was an existential threat, because we know climate change is an existential threat, but it was because we had the solutions in place and those solutions didn't actually harm current interests at the time, right? It was a substitutability issue, right? So now you'll see in 20 years time, 10 years time, once Shell and BP and the rest have made the transition into renewables and they know they can reap the same benefits, you won't have fossil fuels anymore running things, but the structure of who actually gets to benefit maintains. But that's my critical sort of science hat on that. And the final point is, and I don't think it is ready yet, but the Earth Commission report, I think, is another useful one to complement the IRP that was talking about safe operating space across all the planetary boundaries. So coming.
So welcome, Nicolas, our last invited participants. Bienvenido. Before we continue, just would like to let him introduce himself. ¿Puede presentarte? ¿Quiere hablar en español?
En español. Si no, será difícil. Pero no tenéis traducción. Pues, no, si no.
Marta Caballero.
Ah, me pongo Marta.
Sí.
Ok. ¿Tanto tiempo? ¿Tanto tiempo con mi idioma? No.
I need to ask a question in the time in the sentence.
¿Puede presentarse?
Good morning. I am sorry, I'm very late time I arrived to the university. I am Nicolas Fernandez, president to the Ibero-American Small Scale Fisheries Network and manager to the organization productor small scale fisheries in the south of Spain. And I hope this meeting view in the future the best to the lots, no? A 10% of the fishermen on small scale fisheries in the world. Los pescadores somos los más interesados
So we are the most interested
en disponer de la mejor salud de los océanos.
to have the best health of the oceans.
El problema más importante
So the more important problem
es precisamente que todas las culpas de lo que pasa en el océano, todos los problemas del océano, siempre piensan la mayor parte del mundo que es de los propios pescadores.
and all of the problems always are coming from the small fisheries.
Ya. Pero Si no hay océanos sanos,
But if we don't have healthy oceans,
no hay pesca,
it's obvious that there is no fishing.
no hay pescadores
There's no fishers,
y no existiríamos.
and we would not exist.
Y creo que es importante que piensen que si no existimos, el sector pesquero de pequeña escala en la costa del mundo, nuestra identidad como sociedad sería otra diferente y además sería una sociedad profundamente triste.
So I want you just imagine that if we don't exist, I think all the identity of the coastal communities would be lost, and it will become a society that is profoundly sad.
Yeah, thank you. Gracias, Nicolás. Bienvenido. Yes, take the floor to Rama.
Thank you. I want to go back to what Panya had said about how scientists come up with their recommendations, but the policymakers don't quite know what to do with them because the things that they're trying to deal with are different from what the scientists have said, or at least the language is not the same. And we are, of course, meeting in Barcelona, in Spain, and we have a large number of folks here. I want to ask a question, particularly to people from Spain, because what we say is needed in theory, when it meets practice, is very different. And this is where, to use an Americanism, the tire meets the road or something along those lines. What it is this: you have a project in Spain right now for offshore wind turbines. And there is a conflict between those that say, well, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, so the wind turbines is the solution. And then there are those that say that the biodiversity conservation is very adversely impacted by these wind turbines. And so how is that going to be resolved? It's going to have, I think, effect not only in what Spain does, but generally what the world does. I mean, you've given examples of how the marine protected areas have increased fisheries. But in the beginning, there was a concern that it would be the opposite. So when you or anybody else from Spain, if they would like to say something about that, that would be, I think, very helpful.
Yes, thank you, Rama, for your question. I think it touches on the heart of how to deal with conflicts, right? I think we have on the room someone that is looking into this and actually lives in Spain. Do you want to take the floor?
Yeah, I'm studying. I mean, I'm not an expert at all, but I'm starting to look into some of the impacts on the ecosystem of offshore wind farms here in Catalonia. We have a very large pilot project coming up just up north in the Roses. And it's interesting because I've actually read some reports within the marine conservation community. They're starting to toss around that maybe we could look at offshore wind farms as OECMs, other effective conservation measures. But to be honest, we don't, it's still something that's only been modeled at this point. We need a lot more empirical evidence in other places. A lot of studies have gone on in the North Sea. Very little has happened in the Mediterranean, so it's it is something that is important because the EU is pushing for a sustainable energy transition. And we don't want to end up in the same position as we have with greenhouse gases. We just have another fatal impact down the line once we've upscaled, and we're starting to use marine resources instead. But yeah, it's just something that our research at this point.
Thank you. Yeah, adding to that, for instance, in Brazil, it's a big problem for fishers that the environmental licensing processes does not take into account social licensing. So how they, local people that are for generations using that fishing territory, how they are consulted. So there is For instance, the Ibero-American organization, that there is a like free and informed consent protocols for engaging with local communities so they can bring out their knowledge, their perspective as well in blue economy developments. It's very contentious. I think Christina wants to chip in.
Yeah, just to add another, I think a different layer here, when we need to communicate to other people, and across the room we have many different languages and people from different countries, and so we can spread the word in that way, and not across the world, but I would say for different societies and different people. But I also think, and that might be something for us to consider in the future, if we don't need among ourselves someone that can really translate science into other wording about what we are doing. People that do science communication, that engage not just the stakeholders themselves, but development scientists. Even though I do have some experience in participatory events, sometimes there are conflicting ways and wordings in the way that we express to one another. So there are people that do have the tools to make the connections between different groups of the society, people that can produce information in another type of wording rather than the scientific one and the technical one that we are producing. That might be something for us to also maybe discuss, and then we can engage at that point.
Thank you. Yes, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Yo creo que hay un problema importante porque no solo podemos disponer del lenguaje científico. Yo creo que hay un gran problema y es un poco la reivindicación permanente que yo vengo haciendo en los últimos tiempos, y es la necesidad de poder conjugar el conocimiento científico y el conocimiento empírico, en este caso en todos los niveles. Pero especialmente considero que en todo lo que tiene que ver con la mar, con nuestro entorno marino, es fundamental ese conocimiento empírico junto con el conocimiento científico, porque nadie conoce la realidad. Cuando un científico hace un estudio de las poblaciones de peces, necesita que exista un conocimiento empírico para que le ayude a saber cómo está esa población de peces. Existen ejemplos claros en donde se nos dice que una especie, un stock, está mal, y en un estudio de batimetría que se haga, de estudio de localización de la biomasa, y luego nos damos cuenta que los pescadores están capturando el tamaño de especie que a ellos no les sale. Y eso ya se cambia. Pues igual en todo.
So I think, there's that is important, and it's also about this issue that we don't have to rely only on the scientific language, but there's a kind of something that I've been kind of advocating quite a lot, which is we need to have this scientific knowledge, but also the empirical knowledge, especially in the sea, because it's so important. Actually, in the reality, when a marine scientist or scientist needs to have kind of an assessment of the stock's health, they need actually this empirical knowledge to provide this data. So fisheries are very important in this respect. And this is kind of extended to all the matters.
Thank you. We have one description in the Zoom, then we come back to our room here. Andrei, your perspective from science diplomacy. Can you hear us?
Thank you, Leopoldo, very much. And it's interesting to follow, because we have to remember that science is only one factor that is taken into account into the policy making. And the policy making cycle is very much reliant on the public perceptions and the public opinion, meaning the voters. So that's why I am a huge fan of the ocean literacy component that we are developing, because ocean literacy began with something towards education. And it was thinking about changing curricula and teaching kids, etc. And now it's moving into the policies, science policy interface sphere, exactly because it realized that not even the lay public, but the policymakers or us as a society, we do understand how we are related to the ocean and how the ocean is related to us. And I would move forward a little bit and end with this dichotomy. So it's all about one thing, right? One system, one whole. And with that regard, I think that the IPOS should have, as was brilliantly presented by Martha, we should think about a big strategy, not just for communication, but for literacy, in a sense of getting everything that is being developed under UNESCO, under a lot of ocean literacy groups that are emerging now, and learn from them what are the strategies that are being developed around those themes, so we could think about how to better communicate, but also how to engage. And in that engagement, we need an effort from the scientists, we need another effort from the policymakers. And again, I think there's room for us to be a little bit more creative, in a sense that we should be thinking outside the box and thinking how this interaction should be in the ideal world. Let's say we should have this new world view. Thank you.
You have Andre and then Arnaud.
Yeah, very shortly. I agree completely with Andre. Actually, this is what I was about to say. We have to think about how to effectively regular ordinary people that are not necessarily directly, or they don't see necessarily directly related to ocean systems. Because we want or not, people drive, market, people are consumers, and they have a huge impact on corporation strategies, and eventually some of them lobby strongly policymakers. So ordinary people have a real power to change policy as well. So we actually need to find a way to communicate to ordinary people the importance of those strategies. Because it's becoming clear that this is the way ordinary people organize around market is much faster than any kind of a research we can do. You know, with Twitter, they can change completely the consumer perspective, etc. And I think this is a kind of public, the general public, we need also to try to target. Sometimes a documentary, just maybe this is not relevant here, but sometimes a documentary, Netflix, change more people's mind than 10,000 papers produced over 5 years, over, I don't know, 5 billion euros. So I think this is a kind of ground that we need to try to work as well. Most of us don't have experience. I don't have experience, but I see this. This is extremely necessary.
Yeah, the same line on finance policy, linking knowledge and actionable knowledge is an experience, it's a process. So it's not just by reading a report. And it's, I want to share an experience I've already shared with you, but we have a city in France, La Rochelle, which is by the Atlantic Ocean. They were severely hit by storms and waves. And a few years ago, with a lot of casualties by the littoral, like, and they will be very affected by the sea level rise. And as you said, the global picture is not adapted to the local situation. Like 20 centimeters sea rise will mean at some point that in times of extreme events that are likely to occur more often, like waves will be 7 meters higher, and we have to get prepared. And what people in La Rochelle were doing was staying in the same track. Okay, we will increase the level of the dams and of the sea dikes, like we have been doing for 2 centuries or 3 centuries now. And that's where knowledge came into action. In fact, we had a laboratory, which is an interdisciplinary laboratory, a bit like ICTA, which is called LIANS, on littoral and environment, mixing natural and social sciences. An oceanograph tried to reconstitute the past of the ocean with the help of historians, because we were lacking some measurements. And then it could show what general level, sea level will generate in time of storms, in terms of waves. And then share it with the political scientists, which in turn design serious games or workshop with policymakers. Help them understand what was at stake, but also what was the consequences of our choices. For instance, ecologists and biologists were taken on board, and they showed that, and physicists as well, like they show that if you increase the size of the walls, of the dams, of the dikes, you will just increase in turn the size of the waves. But if you open some access to the waves, like if you keep wetlands in estuaries and mangroves like landscape, you can dissipate the wave, and it can have a benefit also for agricultural purposes. So they feed this workshop with all this data, and add city planners and policymakers join the game. And it turned out that they had to face it's virtual, 3 waves. They had to be hit by 3 different waves before they start thinking that maybe doing as usual, increasing the dams, increasing the level of the walls, shouldn't be the answer. And what we noticed as well, they had to feel, they have to see, but to feel that they could be negatively affected by the choices of their neighboring colleagues, to start to think that maybe collaboration should be an option in solving the problem. And I think this way of disseminating knowledge into action is something we should maybe think about within the IPOS. So this will highlight that we need both global and local knowledge. Like scientists should be free, of course, to develop knowledge wherever we lack knowledge, but also on a local level. So embark local stakeholders. But also that transformative science has something to do with the way we disseminate knowledge, and we actually provoke an experience of sensing this knowledge.
So I have Rama on my radar. Before I pass on to him, I'm just closing this loop because he provoked the issue of conflicts and how conflicts are important to deal with, and how to deal with conflicts if you have different perspectives, even from the science community and from the local communities. So it was mentioned also, closing with Arnaud, the importance of collaboration and literacy, the education, how about the science and about the knowledge that exists on certain topics related to ocean. But when coming back to how we deal with such conflicts, usually it has been stated a lot of importance on marine spatial planning, where you have large chunks of ocean and you engage in multiple stakeholder platforms like forums for collaboration. But stakeholder forums, multiple stakeholder forums, usually they are supposed to put everyone on the table on an equal level. And that's a problem because not everybody is on equal levels, considering ocean literacy aspects, but especially talking about fisheries. They're not on equal level of power, of influence, of preparedness with to be represented well in such forums. So with lots of concern on multiple stakeholderism, which puts everybody on an equal level, and supposedly it's the way to deal with conflicts. But that's not how, in my opinion, the conflicts have to be centered in ocean governance processes. And there are many ways to work around that. Yeah, yes, please, Patricia, just go ahead. Oh, no, sorry, Ramos, sorry. Yeah, no, sorry.
Thank you. So I was interested on your slide on measuring success. because I think that's a very critical topic that we are going to discuss also later on. And you also mentioned this morning about ICCC as one of the most successful report, and you mentioned that it was, of course, addressing global scale more, and it was more of an approach like top down. And I mean, we said clearly that we want to have the top down, but it's key to have the bottom up. So, but when they measure success, for example, I think in general, it's very difficult to measure success, because when I see the emission, the CO2 emissions, I don't see very much success. But of course, in terms of awareness and so on, it is a great success. So I think it is also dependent on your monitor. So one requirement that we have is really to think about top down, and so addressing policymaker and also addressing people, general audience, and making change, as we say, from above. It is a two very different type of approach that we need to think about, and how can we be successful in these two ways.
I'm trying to check if we.
But a question for you is, how exactly they measure success? Like, so in this slide, you say that there are, well, I saw comments that they say measuring success, and they say, oh, there are many ways of measuring success. And
I think what we're saying on the slide is that we need to look at what are the measurements of success.
Yeah.
What does success look like?
Yeah.
And for different stakeholders, policymakers, success would look like an action that's been implemented that results in a healthier ocean. I mean, I would imagine that would be the outcome. We would want to have an outcome that you can see this intervention or this policy or this regulation has made the ocean healthier. And that's where something like Ocean Health Index can do that on a very global level. But we don't have enough tools for that. We don't have enough tools to see what is the impact of our actions for the ocean. And it's something that we need to work on. But the exciting thing is that there are already tools that are doing that for other things like the COVID policy tool. So it means that it's possible. And that's the kind of tool that would be incredibly useful to have, so that we know if we created an interventional policy or a regulation that we can see if it has in marine protected areas, fisheries, you can see fisheries improving, we can see income improving. But if you're looking at reducing acidification in the area or nutrient runoff or something like that, it would be easier to actually have a metric that you can plug into a system that can tell you this is improving, your policy is working, and they have that in the Baltic Sea. They have very big success there with reducing nutrient runoff, with making fisheries more sustainable, and they are that being demonstrated now to have an impact. But we need more tools like that. So that's what point I was trying to make.
Okay. Well, first of all, Leopoldo, thank you for that wonderful summary that you have provided just now. And one of the reasons for bringing up this Catalan case and the offshore windmill and the biodiversity conservation is to point out the importance of situations like that, that we need to be aware of in any connection that we try to make with decision making. I don't want to just call it policy makers, because the decision makers are all over the place. Policy makers may be just in the capitals taking decisions and so on. But we need to think about, as you pointed out, the multi-stakeholderism, becomes a very important point. But one thing we don't realize is, the so-called rubber meets the road scenario. One thing that we don't realize is that the kind of contradictions that are there in how these decision makers approach these issues. And we, as part of IPOS or otherwise, have an obligation to say, what are the first principles that you must abide by? When I worked with Laura's colleague, Mary Scholes, on International Nitrogen Initiative, and one of the funders of that was the Dutch government. And the Dutch government's view, they funded the project, their view, as outlined in the UNEP resolutions, is that we need a global approach to ensuring that the fertilizer use is contained, etc. But their view outlined in the European Commission is very different, completely contradictory. So we need to be able to call out these things and make that connection. So one recommendation to Francoise and Tanya is that when we do this, we take some of these examples and say, where does the science come out from? And how do we proceed with it? So then the relevance of that becomes very real to people that are out in the field trying to make these things work.
We have Maria on the Zoom. Please take the floor.
Yes, I think you can hear me. I can offer the examples that we have from the Baltic, and also we actually have in the European system for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, where there is actually a full cycle which starts with data and it starts with assessment of the status. It has also integrated target setting there. For at the European level, we're creating thresholds for what is a good environmental status of the marine environment. And then the full cycle, it integrates action. So we create programs of measures. And in the Baltic, we have something that's called the Baltic Sea Action Plan that has been agreed among the governments. And the full cycle then comes into monitoring how both the measures in the action plans, how they are implemented, and how the status of the environment, how that develops. So in that sense, the success is being measured. And in the Baltic, I think Tanya mentioned, but for example, for nutrients and eutrophication, there is this full cycle exists. And we have even set caps of nutrient loads, maximum allowable inputs for the Baltic Sea. That's a very good example, but it's a full cycle. And the policymakers are involved in designing and setting up the cycle, and because they are the ones who are then responsible for agreeing on the action plans and agreeing on the measures that are to be taken. Of course, that is the most difficult part, to come up with the actions and to implement the actions. And at the European level, we have the challenge that many of the actions are actually under other policies than environmental policies, like fisheries and agriculture was also mentioned here. So it definitely is very challenging, but there are some of these examples where we do have these full cycles that are working. They are not yet producing the best of results, but nevertheless they are going ahead and there are results being produced. I missed part of the beginning of your discussion, but I guess you were talking about how the information is intercepted into policy. Perhaps I can offer from the IPCC side and from a member state works side, I can offer the experience that at least in my country, in Finland, the IPCC reports are taken rather seriously. The full work that is involved. It actually involves a lot of people in the government, also in the science, that are behind and are somehow participating in the work. And through their work, it actually then also, it trickles down to the policymakers. But very importantly, the results, I think the summaries for policymakers, which go through whole of this negotiation type of a procedure where the texts are agreed, which is in itself a process that is engaging, really. But what is really crucial is the credibility, and actually that there is this language of confidence that is being used. And I think that also partly contributes to that. These reports are taken rather seriously, and not just by policymakers and the whole machinery behind them, but also the private sector. And I have seen that actually there are situations when the private sector is willing to move much faster than the policymakers, where there is much more hiatus in the policymaking community in relation to some of the private sector actors. And when it comes to IPUS, I think this issue of credibility, communication, and then also the idea that it's not just the policymakers directly, but through the society, through the private sector, through other actors, that they are being impacted. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria. We're coming to a close of this morning very shortly. This final session now, we are heading towards the gaps also in the assessments. So while I'm just keeping an eye on the foods on the table there. So we have perhaps 5 minutes to 10 minutes before we go. Thanks for all the food for thought, actually. And while Tanya puts up the slides, let's think about some gaps that we can think of. Yeah, Nicolás, please take it.
A mí me gustaría concluir la parte esta de la mañana después de escuchar a la comisión y su experiencia y algunas cosas que he podido oír, porque me he perdido bastante de la mañana. Me gustaría que en la fotografía nos colocásemos cada uno en qué lugar somos importantes o qué importancia tiene o qué el papel que cada uno de nosotros juega en esta fotografía. Porque no es lo mismo el papel que puede jugar el sector pesquero, los grandes poderes económicos, las ONGs, el mundo de la ciencia. ¿Dónde estamos cada uno? ¿Qué interés tenemos cada uno? ¿Y dónde podemos conciliar los intereses de todos hacia un solo objetivo común? ¿Qué sería mejor para la humanidad? Porque algunas veces hay tanto temporal que con el temporal, con el ruido de la mar, nos perdemos. Yo creo que sería interesante que en estos tiempos de ahora hiciéramos un gran ejercicio de aterrizaje sobre el papel de cada uno de nosotros. Es muy importante.
Okay.
You need a little espresso.
Yes, so I would like to conclude this session of the morning after also hearing the commission and all of you guys, and I'm sorry I've lost a bit this morning part of the discussion, but I would like to bring in this idea of that we would like to reflect on what is the importance and what is the role of each one of us in this bigger picture, no? Because I'm sure it's not the same role and the same weight of the fishing sector, of the big economic powers, the NGOs, the scientists, etc. And I think we need to reflect on which is the interest of each one of us, so we could then reconcile all these different objectives into one single common objective. Which is for the interest of the humanity, no? Because sometimes with all the noise of the sea that we hear, we get lost. And I think we need to land into one single vision.
Thank you, Nicolás. Yes, very nice words. And so we are letting into the gaps. We're going to address many of these issues on the afternoon again. And so I think it has been so far a brilliant event. And that's precisely the perspective that we're bringing for IPOS. It's bridging diversity. Right. So each one, very wise words, each one on its place. And here we try to connect. And I'll take the floor for the final slides. We promise it's the final bunch of information we throw at you.
But I wanted to say something as well, Nicola. It was an example I wanted to mention earlier, and we in South Africa we have this group of women sing Patagayo, and there is this beautiful melody that they sing, and it starts with one voice, and this woman sings and she says, "This is the sound of one voice." And then another person joins, and then this is the sound of voices too. and then another one joins. This is the sound of voices 3, and then the whole group joins, and then this is the sound of all of us. And this is what we want to try and achieve here today. The sound of all of us. This is just for us to think about this afternoon. We're going to break out and have our 6 categories, but things that we haven't spoken about, just to remind you, this morning was about the environmental pillar, sustainable development. But we have to talk about social science, we have to talk about the economic perspectives, we have to talk about the distribution of impacts on the communities, on the governance structures that we choose, and networked knowledge from local communities. And by that I mean there are lessons being learned, local communities all around the world that we can leapfrog from. We don't have to relearn lessons that have been learned by other communities. We connect, we can accelerate faster. So please keep this in mind. We need to add these in for an inclusive, impactful IPOS this afternoon. And any other considerations you want to add to the table, please feel free to do that when we're doing our IPOS. And then lunchtime.
So we have 1 hour. Yes, let's commit to being here on time. I know the first coffee break was lots of energy to share. So I'll be getting everyone back to the room as we complete 1 hour from now. Okay, thank you. Also, thank you for the people on YouTube for your participation.
Outside is nice. I tell you what, I sent this now, and then I keep adding to the same document.
Good job.
Bueno, bueno. Bueno, yo soy de los que no me callo. Cuando no me calla, rompiendo.